Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I worked a graveyard shift at a toll booth on a deserted stretch of highway. It was mostly empty, a couple of cars passing through every hour, but for the most part, it was dead quiet. That's how I liked it. I'd been at this job for years, sitting alone in my little booth, tucked away from the rest of the world. I never really had trouble with anyone. People would pay, nod, maybe mutter a thank you and go on their way. It was a night like any other. Dark and cold, the kind of cold that seeps in through your bones. It was just me, a couple of headlights every so often, and the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. Around 2 in the morning, I noticed a car approaching slowly from a distance. I could see the headlights getting closer, but they were dim, like the car was crawling along. When it finally reached the booth, it came to a complete stop just a little bit behind the gate, but the driver didn't roll down the window. I couldn't see much of the person inside, just a vague shadow. The headlights cut out, leaving us both in near darkness, save for the dim light from the booth. I waited, figuring he was getting his money or card ready. But he didn't move. I tapped the side of the booth to try and get his attention, but nothing. I leaned a little closer to the glass to see better, trying to make out who it was, but the windows were too dark. Just a shadowy shape behind the wheel. I don't know why, but something about it made me uneasy. I told myself he'd move in a second, that maybe he was just tired or trying to stretch out before continuing on his way. So I waited, tapping my fingers on the counter, just listening to the silence. A few minutes went by. It felt like he was staring at me through the darkened window. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I pressed the button to lift the gate, hoping he'd just drive through. But he didn't budge. The gate went up, the green light blinked, and he just sat there. After a minute, I finally stepped out of the booth, shivering as the cold air hit me. "Hey, you all right?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The window didn't roll down. No response. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the gravel, but still, no reaction from him. Just that dark figure sitting there, watching. I backed up, went back inside the booth, and lowered the gate. Maybe he was drunk or something. Maybe he just needed a few minutes to sober up. I decided to wait it out, figuring he'd eventually leave. But he didn't. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. I kept glancing over at the car, hoping he'd just turn on his lights, pay the toll, and drive away. But he sat there, motionless. My eyes kept darting to the clock, counting down until my shift would end, but I still had hours to go. Every time I looked up, he was there, still staring. After a while, I started to feel trapped. There was nowhere for me to go, really. The booth was small, and I couldn't exactly leave my post. I tried to ignore him, tried to just look at my phone, read something, anything to distract myself, but every few minutes I'd glance up, and he'd still be there, watching me. I thought about calling someone, maybe my boss or the police. But I didn't want to look paranoid or like I couldn't handle my job. I figured he'd get bored eventually, that he'd drive off if I just ignored him. But he didn't. It was nearly 4 in the morning when he finally moved. I glanced up, and I saw the door open. I froze, my heart racing. I watched as he stepped out of the car, slowly, like he had all the time in the world. He was tall, with a thin frame, dressed all in black. He didn't say a word, didn't call out to me. He just stood by his car, staring straight at the booth. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I tried to look calm, but I knew he could see my hands shaking. He took a step closer, then another. He moved slow, deliberate, never breaking eye contact. I hit the button to lower the gate, hoping he'd take the hint, but he just kept coming. Step by step, he walked up to the booth until he was right outside, only the thin glass between us. He stood there, inches away, his face barely visible in the shadows. "Can I help you?" I forced out, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out barely louder than a whisper. He didn't respond. Just stared, his eyes hidden in the dark, but I could feel them on me, cold and unblinking. He leaned forward, pressing his hand against the glass. I could see the outline of his fingers, the smudges his hand left behind. For a second, I thought he was going to break it, just shatter the glass and reach in. But he didn't. He just stayed there, pressing against the window. I stepped back, my mind racing. I tried to remember if I had locked the door to the booth, if there was anything nearby I could use as a weapon, just in case. But there was nothing. Just me, him, and the glass between us. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he stepped back. He tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me, like he was amused. A small, twisted smile spread across his face, and he turned and walked back to his car. He got in, shut the door, and turned on the headlights, flooding the booth with bright light. I shielded my eyes, watching as he reversed, pulling back a few yards. I thought he was finally leaving, but he just parked there, his headlights pointed straight at me. I could see him through the windshield, just a silhouette, but I knew he was watching. The hours dragged by. I didn't move, barely breathed, just kept my eyes on him, waiting for him to leave. But he stayed there, his car idling, headlights blazing. I didn't dare look away, didn't want to lose sight of him for even a second. Finally, as dawn started to break, he put the car in gear and pulled away, disappearing down the highway. I sat there, numb, watching as his taillights faded into the distance. When my shift ended, I reported it to my supervisor, gave a description of the car and the man. They promised to look into it, said they'd keep an eye out. But I knew they wouldn't find him. He hadn't done anything illegal. He just watched. I worked a graveyard shift at a 24-hour convenience store, just me, the buzzing lights, and that ticking clock. It was the kind of job where nothing really happened, just quiet hours with the occasional late-night shopper. People would shuffle in, grab a drink or snack, maybe some smokes, then leave. And I was fine with that. I liked the quiet. But then he started showing up. It was sometime in early September. I remember that night because the air felt heavy, like it might rain. He was just standing across the street, right by the old lamppost that flickered on and off. I noticed him, thought maybe he was waiting for a ride or something, but he just stayed there. No movement, no one else around. At first, I tried not to think too much of it. I kept myself busy, stocked the shelves, cleaned the counter, anything to pass the time. But every time I looked up, he was still there, just staring. It's like he was waiting for something. The next night, he was there again, in the same spot, same stance, arms crossed. He was tall, maybe in his late 30s or 40s, with a bit of a scruffy look. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, nothing that really stood out, but the way he watched, it wasn't normal. I could feel it, that prickle on the back of my neck. I kept telling myself maybe he was just some guy who lived nearby, maybe waiting for someone. But he never crossed the street, never came inside. He didn't come every night, just enough that I started to expect it. Sometimes it'd be 2 nights in a row, then he'd skip a day, then back again. It made me uneasy, but but I couldn't really do anything about it. He wasn't breaking any laws by just standing there. Then, one night, about a week later, he finally came inside. It was around 2 in the morning. The store was empty, like usual, just me and the hum of the freezers in the back. I was restocking the drink fridge when I heard the bell over the door. I looked up, and there he was, stepping in. He didn't look at me right away, just walked down the first aisle, his hands tucked in his jacket pockets. I tried to act normal, just went back to stocking the shelves, but I could feel him watching me from the corner of his eye as he walked slowly through the store. He wasn't looking at the products or grabbing anything, just lingering, one aisle at a time. I kept telling myself not to freak out, that maybe he was finally here to buy something, that it was all just in my head. But then he turned down my aisle, just a few feet away, and stopped. He looked at me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. His gaze was intense, like he was looking right through me. "Hi, Claire," he said. I froze. I hadn't told him my name. I was sure of that. I didn't wear a name tag or anything. There was no way he could have known. My mind raced, trying to think if I'd slipped up somehow, but I knew I hadn't. I forced a smile, tried to play it cool. "Can I help you with something?" He didn't answer right away, just kept staring. Then he tilted his head, almost like he was sizing me up. "You're here alone, aren't you?" he said, like he was making small talk, but his voice was low, calm. Too calm. Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. I didn't want him to know I was alone. I cleared my throat, shrugged. "Not always," I said, hoping it sounded believable. "My manager comes in around 3. He just smiled, a thin, tight smile. "I know you're here alone, Claire," he said, his voice steady, almost amused. I wanted to scream or run, but I forced myself to stay calm. I was in my own store, with cameras watching. I kept my voice even, trying to sound unfazed. "Look, if you don't need anything, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." He took a step closer, too close for comfort, and I could feel my heart racing. "You shouldn't be working here by yourself," he said, like he was giving me advice, like he was concerned for me. "It's dangerous, especially at night." I backed up a little, moving towards the counter where I had a phone under the register. I glanced over at it, hoping he didn't notice, but he did. I could see it in his eyes. He knew exactly what I was thinking. "Don't worry," he said, a bit of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm not here to hurt you. Just wanted to see you up close." His words made my skin crawl. I tried to think of what to say, something that would get him to leave, but my mind was blank. All I could do was stare at him, my throat dry, my hands shaking. Finally, he stepped back, giving me a little space, but he didn't turn to leave. "I'll see you around, Claire," he said, like he was making a promise. Then he walked out, as calm as he'd come in, and disappeared into the night. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That a man came into the store and acted strange? They wouldn't take me seriously. After that, I kept an eye out for him every night, just waiting for him to come back. And he did. Sometimes he'd just stand outside, watching. Other nights, he'd come in, wander around without buying anything, then leave. And every time he'd call me by name. I started dreading my shifts. I didn't feel safe anymore. I tried telling my boss, but he just shrugged it off, said I was overreacting. People are weird sometimes, he told me, like that was supposed to make me feel better. One night, when I couldn't take it anymore, I confronted him. He'd come in, lingered around as usual, and I just snapped. "Why do you keep coming here?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" He looked at me, that same unsettling smile on his face. "I just like seeing you," he said, his voice soft. "I feel like we know each other." "We don't," I said, my voice firm. "Stop coming here." His smile faded, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Anger, maybe. He took a step closer, and I could feel the tension in the air. "Careful, Claire," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't want to make me angry." I didn't know what to say, so I just stayed silent, watching as he finally turned and left. That was the last time I saw him. I don't know why he stopped coming after that. Maybe he found someone else to follow, someone else to watch. I quit the job not long after that. I couldn't stay there, not knowing if he'd show up again. Even now, I still look over my shoulder, still feel like he's out there somewhere, watching. I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. I worked the night shift at a factory on the edge of town. It was always dead quiet, just the hum of machines and the echo of metal clanking in the distance. I worked with a few other guys, but we were spread out across different sections of the building, so I rarely saw anyone except in passing. The place was massive, mostly dimly lit, and had long, shadowy hallways. The kind of place where sounds traveled, sometimes making it hard to tell if you were alone or not. One night, I was on my usual rounds, doing routine checks on the machinery in the far corner of the factory. I didn't see or hear anything strange at first. I was used to the flickering lights and the occasional groaning sound from the old machines. But I felt something that night. I couldn't explain it, but it was like I was being watched. Every time I turned my back, I felt this prickling on my neck, like eyes were on me. I shrugged it off at first, kept telling myself it was just nerves. It was easy to get jumpy working night shifts in a place like that. But when I walked by one of the big industrial machines, something caught my eye. There was a shadow, something low to the ground, almost like someone crouching. I stopped, leaned a little closer to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Then the shadow moved. I took a step back, my pulse jumping. It was just enough light to see a figure ducking back behind the machine, as if they were trying to stay hidden. My heart started pounding as I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer. I felt a rush of anger, trying to push down the fear. It was probably one of my coworkers trying to mess with me. Maybe John. He liked pulling pranks, but he usually kept it harmless. I wasn't in the mood for his games that night, though. I called out his name, louder this time. "John. If that's you, knock it off." Nothing. Just the low hum of the machines and that faint echo in the distance. I stayed where I was, waiting, staring at that dark spot where I'd seen the figure. After a minute, I started walking again, feeling tense, my ears tuned to every little sound around me. I tried to brush it off, but it kept gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the feeling someone was following me around. I glanced over my shoulder every few seconds, and once or twice, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. But every time I turned, there was no one there. Later in the shift, I finally ran into John in one of the hallways. He looked normal, just carrying some tools, but I still had a weird feeling. I asked him straight up if he'd been hiding behind the machines earlier. He just stared at me, almost too blankly, then laughed it off, saying he had no idea what I was talking about. His laugh was hollow, not the usual kind of laugh he'd give. That threw me off. Something about the way he looked at me then, it was off. Like he wasn't really looking at me, but past me. I laughed it off too, shrugged, and went on with my shift. But after that, things got weirder. I'd be checking one of the machines, and then, just as I'd start to get into a rhythm, I'd look up and catch John's face peeking out from behind one of the other machines, his head just barely visible. He'd be half hidden, and the moment I'd see him, he'd move away, ducking out of sight before I could say anything. It started happening again and again, every hour or so. I'd see him, just out of the corner of my eye, always half hidden behind something, just watching me. And every time, he'd disappear when I tried to confront him. I finally decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I caught up with him in the break room, just him and me. He was standing by the coffee machine, his back turned. I called his name, trying to keep my voice steady, but he didn't respond, didn't even flinch. I took a step closer and called his name again, louder this time. Slowly, he turned around, and there was something in his eyes, something that made me feel like I was staring at a stranger. His face was blank, no expression, just empty. It was like he didn't even recognize me for a second. Then he blinked, and a small smile appeared, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What's up?" I tried to keep my cool, asked him directly why he kept following me around, hiding behind things, watching me. He tilted his head, like he was confused, then shook his head. "I don't know what you're talking about, man," he said, too casually, like it was a rehearsed line. I pressed him, told him I'd seen him, that I wasn't imagining it. But he just kept denying it, over and over, his tone too calm, too smooth. After a minute, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Maybe you need some sleep. You're looking a bit tired." That touch felt wrong. I can't explain why, but it sent a chill down my spine. I pulled away, and his hand dropped, that empty smile still on his face. I left the break room, feeling more uneasy than ever. The rest of that shift, I avoided him as much as I could. But every time I think I was alone, I'd see him again, half hidden behind a machine, peeking around a corner, always watching. I'd try to confront him, but he'd slip away before I got close. At one point, I went to the control room where we had the security cameras, hoping to catch him in the act. I rewound the footage from earlier that night, and there it was, me, walking between machines, checking everything. And then there he was, just as I'd seen him, his head poking out from behind a machine, watching me. But there was something off in the video. His face was blurred, almost like the camera couldn't focus on him. I kept watching, my pulse racing as I saw myself walking away from the camera, and there he was again, slipping out from behind a different machine, watching me go. He never moved quickly, just seemed to drift from spot to spot, following. It made me sick. I couldn't watch anymore. I decided that night would be my last shift. I had enough. I didn't even clock out. I just walked out, got into my car, and drove home, the cold sweat clinging to my skin. I felt like I'd escaped something dark and twisted that I couldn't explain. I didn't go back after that. I quit, and I haven't spoken to John since. Every now and then, though, when I'm alone in a quiet place, I feel it, that same prickling on the back of my neck, like he's watching me from a distance. And in the worst moments, I'll catch a glimpse of something, someone, just out of the corner of my eye, hiding, waiting. I don't think it's over. I worked security at a big hospital, mostly overnight shifts. It was quiet, for the most part, just a few people on staff who I'd see here and there, and patients would sometimes wander the halls. But my main assignment was the wing they were renovating. It was the older part of the building, mostly abandoned, with peeling paint and dust everywhere. The lights flickered half the time, and some of the doors creaked like no one's business. My job was to walk that wing every hour, just to make sure no one was trying to get in there and mess around. It was a strange, hollow kind of quiet up there. One night, I started my usual rounds at about 1 a.m. The rest of the hospital was mostly quiet, just a few murmurs from the nurses down the hall. I didn't think much of anything until I was halfway down the corridor, and I heard something that made me stop in my tracks, a faint whisper. At first, I figured it was the pipes. That place was old, and sometimes it made sounds like that. But then, the whisper got louder, like it was moving closer. I shined my flashlight down the hall, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. I thought maybe I was hearing things. It had been a long shift, and I was tired, so I brushed it off. I kept walking, but as I passed by one of the empty rooms, I heard it again. This time, it was clearer, like someone was just a few feet behind me. I whipped around, shining my flashlight back down the hall, and again, nothing. Just the empty corridor. I tried to shake it off, but that feeling didn't go away. It was like someone was right there, following me, close enough that I could feel it. I picked up my pace, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I was almost done with that wing when I heard it again, but this time, it came from one of the rooms off to my left. It was clearer now, a man's voice, murmuring something low, too soft for me to make out the words. I should have called for backup. I know that now. But at the time, I was irritated, thinking maybe some patient had somehow wandered into the wrong wing. So I called out, "Hello? You're not supposed to be in here." My voice echoed down the empty hallway, but there was no response. I took a few steps into the room, sweeping my flashlight around. There, crouched in the corner, was a man, his clothes dirty, his hair matted. He was huddled there, almost like he was hiding, but not exactly. His eyes were wide, staring right at me, but he didn't say a word. I felt my skin crawl just from the way he looked at me. "Sir, you're not allowed in this area," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. I tried not to let him see that I was rattled. He didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring. I had to be here, he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. It was strange, the way he said it, like he believed it. "Okay, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," I said, stepping back, trying to lead him out. But he didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward a little, still staring at me with those wide eyes. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I've been waiting for you. Following you." I felt a chill run through me. "Following me?" "I don't think so, sir," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But something in his face changed, his expression softened, and a twisted little smile appeared on his lips. He nodded slowly. "Yes. I see you every night. I know when you're here. I came here for you." I didn't know what to say. There was something in his voice, something calm but wrong. Like he wasn't even talking to me, but to himself, as if he was explaining something he'd thought about for a long time. I pulled out my radio to call for backup, but he moved suddenly, lunging forward just enough to make me step back, holding my hand up like I was going to defend myself. He didn't try to attack me, though. He just stopped and looked at me with that same intense stare. "They don't know what you've done," he muttered, like it was some kind of warning. "They think you're safe. But I know who you really are." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Sir, I'm calling security. If you don't leave right now." He laughed, a low, strange laugh that sounded more like he was joking. "Security? I know all about them. I know all about this place. You don't get it, do you? I'm here because of you." He moved toward me again, and I backed out of the room, keeping my eyes on him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I reached for my radio again and called it in, trying to keep my voice steady. I need assistance in the West Wing. Possible trespasser. He just stood there in the doorway, staring at me, that twisted smile still on his face. He tilted his head, watching me like he was amused. They won't come in time. They don't know what you've done. But I do. I had no idea what he was talking about. The words didn't make sense, but the way he said them, it felt like he was accusing me of something, like he knew some secret about me. And the worst part was, I felt like he believed every word. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps down the hall. Two of my coworkers rounded the corner, and as soon as they saw the man, they rushed over. But the strange thing was, he didn't try to fight them. He just smiled that same creepy smile, letting them take him by the arms without a struggle. As they led him away, he turned his head back to look at me. "I'll see you soon," he whispered. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that he meant what he said. I didn't sleep well for days, kept looking over my shoulder, wondering if he'd somehow find a way to come back. I told my supervisor about it, but they brushed it off, said he was probably just some homeless guy who wandered in. They didn't think he was a real threat. But every time I thought back to the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that he meant it, that he'd come back. And one night, he did. It was about a week later, and I'd started to convince myself that maybe I'd imagined some of it, that he wasn't as dangerous as he'd seemed. But then, as I was finishing up my rounds, I saw something that stopped me cold. There, on one of the hallway walls, written in what looked like marker, were the words, "I see you." My stomach dropped. It had to be him. I didn't know how he'd gotten back in, but I was sure of it. I checked the security footage, but it showed nothing, no sign of anyone coming in or out of that part of the hospital. The cameras didn't catch a thing. I tried to report it, but my supervisor said there wasn't enough evidence to take it seriously. They said it was probably just some kid playing a prank. But I knew it wasn't. I knew it was him. I spent the next few weeks on edge, jumping at every sound, checking the corners of every room before I walked in. And every once in a while, I'd find another message, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes on a door or a wall. "I know you. I'm here." Just short messages, but they were enough to keep me looking over my shoulder, wondering if he was somewhere close by, watching. I don't work there anymore. I couldn't do it, not with that feeling hanging over me every night, that feeling that he was somewhere in the shadows, waiting. I don't know if he ever found someone else to follow, or if he's still out there, looking for me. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I still feel that prickling on the back of my neck, like I'm not really alone, like he's there somewhere, just watching, waiting. Working the night shift at the airport had always been routine. It's a small place, not like the big city airports where there's always something happening. By midnight, things quiet down, the last flight is done, and there's only a handful of us here, just security, a few cleaning staff, and me, working in operations. It's mostly checking the gates, making sure everything's shut down, lights are off, nothing out of place. I'd gotten used to it, the silence, the echo of my footsteps. But it wasn't long before I noticed something strange. It started with a suitcase. A battered black suitcase, like any other you'd see at an airport, just sitting by gate 3. We don't have that many gates in this place, maybe 6, so seeing a bag just lying there was out of the ordinary. I didn't think much of it at first, thought maybe someone forgot it, and I radioed security. They came by, took a look, and after a bit of back and forth, they took it to the lost and found. But the next night, there was another one. Same place. A black suitcase, but this one looked older, like it had been through rougher times. The handle was worn, the zipper a bit frayed. I called security again, but they just shrugged it off, said maybe it was some prank. That made no sense to me. Who would go through the trouble of sneaking into a small airport just to leave an old suitcase lying around? I shook my head, told myself to forget about it. It kept happening, though. Every night, around the same time, I'd find another one at gate 3. It became part of my shift. I'd go to gate 3, check for the suitcase, and sure enough, there it would be. Different each time, but always black, always in worse shape than the last one. One night, I got curious and peeked inside. I know I shouldn't have, but I had to know. I thought maybe someone was doing it as a joke, stuffing the bag with clothes or something random. But inside, I found something else entirely. There were torn photos, dozens of them. Photos of people, some smiling, some looking caught off guard, like someone had snapped a picture of them without them noticing. I felt a chill go up my spine. The faces in the photos all looked different, strangers to me, but each one seemed off in some way. Some were worn out, their eyes smudged like someone had tried to rub them out. I didn't know what to think. I quickly zipped it back up and called security again. This time, they didn't laugh it off, but they still didn't seem that worried. They took the suitcase, said they'd keep it in evidence, but I could tell they thought it was just some sick prank. But the suitcases kept coming. Each one had something different. Some had notebooks with messy handwriting, pages filled with ramblings that didn't make sense. Others had things like old children's toys, broken and worn, the kind that looked like they'd been pulled out of an attic after years of collecting dust. And every night, the suitcase would just be there, waiting for me. I tried not to let it get to me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I'd walk through the gate area, I'd get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone's eyes were on me. I started to look around more, checking the corners, but there was never anyone there. Just me and that damned suitcase. One night, I decided I'd had enough. It was eating at me, the not knowing. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. So I stayed late, past my shift, and hid near gate 3. I kept to the shadows, barely moving, my heart pounding so hard I thought whoever was doing this might hear it. I was ready to confront whoever it was, to ask them what they were doing, why they kept leaving these bags. After what felt like hours, I saw him. A man, tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie that covered most of his face. He walked up to the gate, looking around like he was checking to see if anyone was there. Then he put the suitcase down, just like that, with this strange carefulness, almost like he was handling something fragile. I stepped out from my hiding spot, my voice coming out louder than I expected. "Hey! What are you doing?" He froze, his head snapping up to look at me. I couldn't see his face well, but I felt his eyes on me. Cold, sharp. We stood there, staring at each other, and I suddenly felt like I'd made a mistake. He didn't say a word, just slowly backed away, his gaze never leaving mine. Then, just as quickly as he'd come, he turned and disappeared down the hallway. I didn't follow. Something in his eyes, the way he looked at me, it made me feel like I shouldn't. Like it wasn't safe. Instead, I walked over to the suitcase, my hand shaking as I reached for the zipper. This one felt heavier than the others, and as I opened it, I braced myself. Inside was something that made my stomach turn. There were more photos, but this time, they weren't of strangers. They were photos of me. Me at my desk, me walking down the halls, me at the coffee machine. Someone had been following me, watching me. There were notes too, scribbled on scraps of paper, describing things I'd done, things I'd said on the phone, details about my life that only someone who'd been watching me would know. I felt a wave of panic, realizing that this wasn't just some sick prank. This person had been following me for who knows how long, keeping track of me, studying me. I shut the suitcase and backed away, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Calling security felt useless. They hadn't taken me seriously before, and even if they did, what could they do? For the rest of the night, I couldn't concentrate. I felt like I was being watched from every shadow, like he was still somewhere close, just out of sight. When my shift finally ended, I went straight home, locking every door and window. But even then, I didn't feel safe. The next night, I tried to act like everything was normal, but I was on edge, jumping at every sound. I avoided gate 3 as much as I could, but eventually, I had to check it. And when I did, there it was, another suitcase. This one was smaller, worn down like the others, but somehow more sinister. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I had to. Inside, there was only one thing, a small note written in the same messy handwriting I'd seen before. It read, "You can't hide." I felt a cold sweat break out. I closed the suitcase, my hands shaking, and I radioed security again, my voice barely steady. They came, took the bag, but this time, I didn't wait around to see what they'd do with it. I clocked out early and went straight to my boss, told them everything, asked to switch shifts. I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep finding those suitcases every night, feeling that man's eyes on me. They agreed, though I could tell they didn't fully believe me. I didn't care. I just needed out. A few nights later, I was at home, trying to sleep, when I heard something outside my window. A soft, scraping sound, like something brushing against the glass. My heart was pounding as I sat up, my eyes glued to the window. I wanted to look, but I was terrified of what I'd see. I sat there, frozen, until the sound stopped. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Eventually, I moved, got a place far from that airport, somewhere I thought he wouldn't find me. It's been a few months now, and I haven't seen any suitcases, haven't heard any strange sounds outside my window. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel it, that prickle on the back of my neck, that feeling that someone's watching. And every time I do, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the right moment to leave another suitcase just for me. The night shift at the front desk was usually uneventful. It was a small hotel, just a handful of guests at any given time, and the lobby was empty most of the night. I'd sit at the desk, sometimes doing nothing but scrolling on my phone or reading a book to pass the time. It wasn't the kind of job that kept you on your toes. It was quiet, still. Nothing ever happened. Then, one night, I got a call around 2:30 in the morning. I remember the time exactly because I just looked at the clock, counting the hours left in my shift. The phone ringing in the dead silence of the lobby made me jump a little. I picked it up, doing my best to sound alert and professional. "Front desk, how can I help you?" There was a pause on the other end. I thought maybe it was one of the guests needing something, but all I heard was breathing. After a few seconds, I was about to hang up, assuming it was a prank, when a man's voice came on. It was low, calm, almost too calm. "I see you're reading." I froze, my heart skipping. I'd been holding my book in my lap, just flipping through pages without really paying attention. It was a small habit, something I did to stay awake. I looked around the empty lobby, wondering if maybe it was one of the guests playing a joke. But the voice, I didn't recognize it. I glanced at the monitors by the desk. There were security cameras covering most of the main areas, including the lobby, but I didn't see anyone. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to sound firm. The line went quiet again for a moment, then he spoke. "I'm just here. Watching." I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. My skin felt prickly, like I was being watched from somewhere just out of sight. I checked the cameras again, but the lobby was empty, and all the other feeds were showing empty hallways and closed doors. I told myself it was a prank, probably one of the guests who'd seen me from a window or something. Maybe they just wanted to mess with me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "if this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. I'm calling security." "No, you're not," the voice said, almost in a whisper. "You're just going to keep standing there. Because you know I'm close. You know I can see you." I swallowed hard, a cold sweat starting to form on the back of my neck. I looked around again, every corner of the lobby. There was nothing, nobody, just the stillness of the night. I picked up the phone again, this time to call my manager or security, but as soon as I lifted it, the line went dead. Silence. I tried pressing some buttons, but the phone wasn't responding. It was like it had just shut down. "Don't ignore me." The voice was in the room, almost as if it was right behind me. I whipped around, but no one was there. My mind was racing, trying to figure out if I was imagining things or if someone was really there, just out of sight. I moved to the back office, where there was another phone line, hoping this one would work, but as soon as I touched the receiver, the lights in the lobby flickered, then dimmed. "Why are you hiding?" he said, his voice filling the quiet. "I can see you." I bolted out of the office, half expecting to see someone standing in the lobby, but it was empty. My legs felt shaky as I walked back to the front desk. The cameras were still on, all the screens showing empty hallways, empty rooms, nothing out of the ordinary. But it didn't make sense. I could feel him watching me, somewhere close. I grabbed my phone, about to call 911, but then my screen lit up with an unknown number. It was a text. "You don't need to call for help," it read. "I'm right here with you." I dropped the phone, my heart racing. I didn't even pick it up. I just stared at it, like it would start ringing again at any moment. And then it did. The same number. I couldn't ignore it this time. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and put it to my ear without saying anything. "You're looking a little scared," he said, his voice softer, almost mocking. "You don't have to be scared, you know? I'm just here to talk." My voice came up barely a whisper. "Who are you?" He chuckled, low and quiet. "I'm someone who knows you. Someone who's been watching you for a while now. You're very interesting." My breath was coming in short gasps now. "What do you want?" "Oh, nothing much," he said. "Just to see you." I looked at the cameras again, scanning each one carefully, looking for any sign of movement. But everything was still, as if the whole hotel was holding its breath. I didn't know what to do. I was too afraid to leave, but staying felt even worse. I decided to go into the back office again, lock the door, call the police, anything to get away from the open space of the lobby. As I moved, I could hear his voice again, this time from the speaker system. "Running away? That's not very nice." I froze. The speaker system in the lobby was playing his voice. I looked up at the small speaker mounted on the wall, feeling like his eyes were right there, watching me from some hidden place. "Don't leave, please," he said, his tone dripping with something that felt almost like sadness. "I just want to see you one last time." I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing down the hall as I dashed into the back office, slamming the door shut. I locked it and leaned against it, my whole body shaking. The phone on the desk was blinking, another incoming call. I couldn't bring myself to answer, but the ringing wouldn't stop. It just kept going, that endless sound filling the small room. I picked it up, hands trembling, and held it to my ear. I told you, you can't hide. I dropped the phone again, backing away until I was pressed against the wall. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct told me to get out of there, but I felt trapped. He knew everything I was doing, every step I took. I grabbed my phone again, my fingers fumbling as I tried to text my manager, but before I could even type a single word, another text came through. Open the door. I stared at the message, my hands cold. Open the door, it said again, like he knew exactly where I was, what I was doing. No, I whispered to myself, clutching my phone, trying to think of something, anything I could do to get out of this. I typed out a quick text to my manager, asking for help, telling him someone was in the building, but as soon as I hit send, my phone went dark. Then I heard it. Soft, slow footsteps outside the office door. The sound of someone moving, pausing, then moving again. I covered my mouth to keep from making any noise, pressing myself back against the wall, hoping he'd just leave, hoping he'd go away. The footsteps stopped right outside the door, and I could hear him breathing, the same low, steady breathing I'd heard on the phone. I know you're in there, he whispered. Come on out. I'm waiting. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just kept my eyes on the door, waiting for it to burst open. But after a few seconds, the breathing stopped. Silence. I waited, straining my ears, but I didn't hear anything. Minutes passed, and still nothing. I reached for the phone on the desk, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. The line connected, and I barely managed to whisper, "There's someone in the building. He's been watching me. Please send someone." The dispatcher assured me help was on the way, told me to stay put, stay quiet. I hung up, the phone slipping from my hand as I slumped against the wall, waiting, listening. Every sound felt magnified, every creak of the floor, every small rustle of paper. I felt trapped, caught in this nightmare that didn't seem real. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the distant sound of sirens. I stayed put until I heard the heavy footsteps of the police outside the door, calling my name. They found me there, shaking, barely able to explain what had happened. They searched the building but found nothing. No one had seen a man come or go, and all the cameras showed was me, alone, moving around the lobby, talking on the phone. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And even now, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting for the next time I let my guard down. I was on patrol that night, working the late shift on this long stretch of highway where I hardly ever saw a car after midnight. It was around 3 a.m. when I spotted something up ahead, off to the shoulder. Just a dark shape, no lights. I slowed down and switched on my high beams, and sure enough, it was a car, parked there with everything off. No hazards, no headlights. I pulled up behind it and left my headlights shining on the rear of the vehicle. It was one of those old sedans, maybe from the early 90s. I figured someone's car had broken down, and they'd gone to get help, though it seemed like a weird time and place to leave it, especially with no lights on. I radioed it in, just to cover my bases, and stepped out, approaching the driver's side. I shined my flashlight inside, and that's when I noticed it was completely empty. The keys were still in the ignition, which gave me a bad feeling right away. People don't usually just leave their keys like that. The air in the car felt stale, like it had been sitting there for a while. There was no sign of the driver, no bags, no phone, nothing. But then I noticed something hot on the back seat, something that made me lean in closer to get a better look. There were papers scattered across the seat, maybe a dozen of them, all pinned in a neat row. Each one had something written on it, in a messy, almost childlike handwriting. I felt this uneasy twinge in my stomach as I tried to read the closest one through the glass. The note read, "I knew you'd find this, officer." That froze me for a second. There wasn't a name, just the title, like it was specifically left for whoever happened to be patrolling this area. I opened the door carefully, feeling this strange mix of dread and curiosity. I leaned over, shining my light on the notes. The next one was worse. "You look tired tonight," it said. "Do you get much sleep?" It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I hadn't told anyone I was running on about 3 hours of sleep. It felt like this note was meant just for me. I forced myself to look at the others, but they only got more unsettling. One said, "You don't really know who I am, but I know you." Another said, "We've been sharing this road for years. You never noticed." It was surreal, like someone was playing a twisted game, and I was the only one who didn't know the rules. My mind was racing with questions. Who would leave these? Why? It was so specific, too pointed to be random. I took out my radio, about to call for backup, but something stopped me. Another note, sitting right in the middle of the back seat, was slightly different from the rest. The handwriting was shakier, almost rushed. It read, "If you call for help, I'll know. Don't disappoint me." My fingers hovered over the radio button. I wanted to ignore it, brush it off as some prank, but a part of me was afraid. I didn't know who I was dealing with, but whoever they were, they knew this road, and they knew I'd be the one patrolling it. I decided to keep going, to check the trunk, just in case there was any other clue. As I walked around the car, I noticed something high on the rear bumper, a small smudge, like a fingerprint, right on the edge of the trunk. It wasn't much, but it felt like it was left there on purpose, like someone wanted me to notice. My heart was pounding as I reached down to lift the trunk. It felt like time had slowed down, every second dragging as I lifted it open. Inside, there was nothing. Just an empty space, clean and well kept, like the owner had taken good care of the car. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a bit of relief, but then I noticed a piece of paper taped to the inside of the trunk lid. I reached up, pulling it off with shaking hands, and shined my light on it. It read, "I knew you'd look here. I left something for you." I turned around, feeling a surge of panic. The road was still empty, and the only sound was the quiet hum of my patrol car. But I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was being watched from somewhere just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the area around me, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing. My eyes went back to the paper, and I realized it was folded in half. I opened it, feeling this sense of dread, like I knew whatever was inside would make everything worse. Inside, there was a simple message, "Look under your seat." I hesitated, glancing back at my patrol car. The headlights were still shining on the sedan, casting long shadows across the road. I didn't want to go back there, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. I was being led along, piece by piece, but by who? And why? I made my way back to my car, every step feeling heavier than the last. I opened the driver's side door, crouching down to look underneath the seat. There was something there, small and dark, almost hidden in the shadows. I reached in, pulling it out, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a photograph. A photograph of me, taken from somewhere nearby. It was a little blurry, but I could see myself clearly, sitting in my patrol car, looking bored, unaware. I flipped it over, and there was another message on the back. "I've been watching you for a long time." I felt sick. This wasn't some random prank. Whoever was doing this had been following me, studying me. They'd taken pictures, left messages. They knew my routine, my shift, even my sleep patterns. I didn't know what to do. My training told me to call it in, to report it, but that note in the back of my mind warned me not to. Just then, My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Dispatch to Unit 17. Are you available to respond? My hand shook as I picked up the radio. Yeah, this is Unit 17. What's the call? There was a pause, and then dispatch said, we've got a report of a suspicious vehicle about a mile from your location. Abandoned, no driver. My heart sank. Another car, another set of messages, probably. I wanted to refuse the call, to ignore it, but I knew that wasn't an option. I couldn't leave it there for someone else to find. So, I agreed, and turned on my lights, pulling away from the sedan, my eyes flicking back to it in the rearview mirror until it disappeared from sight. As I drove down the highway, I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see a car following me, someone watching. But the road stayed empty, just me and the silence of the night. When I reached the location dispatch had given me, I spotted the car right away. Another sedan, dark and silent, parked just off the shoulder. I parked behind it, stepping out with my flashlight, feeling a familiar dread. I walked up slowly, scanning the windows, looking for any sign of life. The car was empty, just like the last one. But on the passenger seat, there was a small envelope, with my name written on it in that same messy handwriting. I didn't want to open it, but I couldn't stop myself. I reached in, pulling out the envelope, my heart pounding as I slid the paper out. Inside was a single line, "This isn't over, officer. I'll see you again soon." I dropped the note, backing away from the car. I felt like I was trapped in some nightmare, one I couldn't escape. Whoever this person was, they weren't done. They were out there, watching, waiting, and there was nothing I could do about it. I radioed it in, finally letting dispatch know what I'd found, but even as I spoke, I knew it wouldn't matter. This was personal. It happened while I was working the night shift at this small, barely lit gas station. I was the only one there, no one else working, and it was the kind of shift that's dead quiet. Not many people come by at 3 a.m. in a place that's basically off the highway in the middle of nowhere. It started out like any other night. I was stocking shelves, making sure everything was neat, filling the coffee machine even though it never got much use at that hour. Then, when I turned around to wipe down the counter, I noticed something odd on the window facing the parking lot. There was writing on it, something scratched into the dirt on the outside of the glass. I moved closer, trying to make it out under the flickering fluorescent lights from inside. It read, "Hello." Just that. Now, that was weird, right? It hadn't been there when I started my shift, and there was no one around, no cars outside. I figured it might have been some bored kids or someone messing around, maybe trying to get a reaction. I shrugged it off, went back to my tasks, trying not to think too much about it. An hour passed. It was about 4 a.m., and I was working at the register, trying to keep myself awake. Then I glanced up, and there it was, another message. This one read, "I can see you." It was in the same spot, scratched right into the dirt again. My heart was pounding because there was still no one outside, no cars pulling in or leaving. I walked over to the window, peering into the parking lot. Nothing. The lights outside barely reached past the edge of the lot, and beyond that, it was just pitch black. There were no bushes or trees, nowhere for anyone to hide. I took a deep breath and tried to laugh it off. Come on, I told myself. It's just some creep, probably thinks it's funny. But as I turned back to go inside, I felt this strange sensation, like I was being watched. I couldn't shake it off. I kept glancing back at the window, half expecting to see a face staring at me, but there was nothing. I decided to check the security cameras. I figured maybe I'd catch a glimpse of whoever was doing this. The cameras weren't great, old black and white ones that only covered certain angles of the lot and the entrance. I rewound to when I first noticed the message, scanning through the footage. There was nothing. Just me, going about my tasks. No sign of anyone near the windows, no movement outside. It was like whoever did it somehow knew where to avoid the cameras. I went back to my shift, trying to brush it off, but I kept getting these chills, like I wasn't alone. Around 4:30, I was stocking the drinks in the cooler at the back when I heard a faint tapping sound from the front. I froze, holding my breath, straining to listen. It was like someone was tapping their fingernail on the glass, just lightly. I stayed quiet, waiting. Then the tapping stopped, but a minute later, I felt compelled to go and check. My gut was twisting. I walked up slowly, and as I came around the corner, I saw it. Another message. This one was right on the front window, near the bottom. It read, "Are you scared yet?" I stood there, staring at it, feeling my skin crawl. It was like this person knew every move I made, waiting for me to turn my back so they could write another message. I knew I needed to check the cameras again, but I was scared of what I'd find. My hands were shaking as I went over to the monitor and rewound the footage, watching as the minutes ticked by. Then I saw it. Right at the edge of the frame, barely visible, there was a figure, crawling low along the ground, almost slithering. They stayed just out of the camera's main view, but I could see enough to tell they were moving, inching along the pavement until they reached the window. They must have been lying down, staying low to avoid the camera. I felt sick. This wasn't some random kid playing a prank. Whoever this was, they knew exactly where the cameras were, and they were using it to their advantage. I tried to make out details, but the footage was grainy, and they stayed just out of clear sight. I could see the shape of a body, limbs pressed close to the ground, and that was it. No face, no clothing, just a shadow moving like it wasn't even human. I stepped away from the monitor, breathing hard, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared to go outside, but I didn't want to stay in there either, trapped behind the counter with that figure somewhere in the dark, just outside. Then, the lights outside flickered, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I whipped around, staring out the window, searching for any sign of movement. And that's when I saw the newest message, scratched right into the dirt on the glass, right at eye level. "Don't turn around." My blood ran cold. Whoever this was, they were watching me right then. I couldn't see them, but they could see me, knew I was there, staring at their message. My instinct was to turn, to look around, but fear kept me frozen. My breath came out shallow, and I tried to stay calm, but every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run. But I couldn't stay there forever. I forced myself to move, to turn and look over my shoulder, praying I wouldn't see anyone. And I didn't. But something felt wrong, like I was missing something right in front of me. I scanned the windows again, double-checking, my hands clenching and unclenching as I looked for anything out of place. I saw one last message, scrawled on the side window near the door, smaller than the others, almost like it was written in a hurry. I had to step closer to read it, my stomach churning. It said, "Next time, I'll be inside." That did it. I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my keys and locked up, leaving the lights on inside. I got in my car and drove out of there, not caring about leaving my shift early. I just wanted to get as far from that place as possible. The manager was angry when I told him the next day, thinking I'd left because I was bored or something. I tried explaining, but he just brushed it off, said there was no sign of anything weird when he checked that morning. No messages on the windows, nothing on the cameras. It was like none of it ever happened. But I know what I saw. I still see it in my mind sometimes, that figure crawling along the pavement, just out of sight, watching me. And sometimes, when I walk past dark windows or mirrors, I catch myself looking, expecting to see something there, a message just for me, waiting in the dirt. It was just supposed to be another night at the station. I'd done the graveyard shift for years, spinning songs for anyone who couldn't sleep or was out on the road. The station was empty, just me in the booth with my headphones and a mug of cold coffee. The studio lights were dim, the hum of the equipment was all I heard between songs, and the world outside felt 1,000 miles away. Quiet, just like I liked it. That night started off normal. I ran my usual segments, read the weather, made small talk with the mic, tried to keep my energy up. The station had this ancient phone line where listeners could call in. Most nights, I'd get maybe 1 or 2 people dialing, usually just to make a song request or try to win a t-shirt we've been giving away for years. But that night, around 2 in the morning, the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting some lonely trucker looking for company on the road or a night owl with a random song request. KXRF, you're on the air, I said, my usual line. The voice on the other end was low, quiet, like they were almost whispering. You're playing some good stuff tonight. Ah, thanks, I replied, a bit caught off guard. Anything you want to hear? The caller didn't answer that. There was a pause, long enough to make me uncomfortable. Then he said, I know you don't like the coffee there. It took me a second to process that. I glanced at my cup on the desk. It was one of those things I'd say sometimes on air to fill the silence, like when I joke about surviving off cold coffee. It wasn't something a regular listener would think to mention. Yeah, well, it's not exactly gourmet, I said, trying to laugh it off, but something about the silence on the line felt wrong. The caller just said, see you soon, and hung up. The line clicked dead before I could respond. I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably just some random weirdo, but that comment about the coffee stuck in my head. I shook it off and kept the show going. Maybe half an hour later, I forgot about it. I got back into the rhythm, the usual mix of old rock and a few top 40 hits thrown in, and by 3 in the morning, I was barely awake, counting down the minutes until my shift ended. Then the phone rang again. I answered, hesitating this time. KXRF, you're on the air, I said, keeping my voice steady. It was him again. I liked that last track you played, he said, and I recognized the voice right away. Glad you enjoyed it, I said slowly. Anything else I can put on for you? There was another pause, and I could almost feel him listening to my every breath. Do you still park out back? I nearly dropped the phone. Nobody should have known that. I'd mentioned driving an old beat-up sedan on air once, but I'd never talked about where I parked. I always parked out back by the alley, away from the front lights, just out of habit. Who is this? I demanded, feeling a bit of fear creep up my spine. He didn't answer, just laughed softly, then hung up again. This time, I put the phone down slowly, staring at it, feeling that eerie chill you get when something doesn't add up. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just some prank caller. But now, every little sound in the studio seemed louder, the walls seemed closer. The booth suddenly felt like a trap. I went to the window and glanced out at the parking lot, but there was nothing out there, just my car under a single streetlight, the rest of the alley swallowed in shadows. The rest of the hour went by painfully slow. Every time a song ended, I felt my skin prickle, half expecting the phone to ring again. But it stayed silent. Just me, my coffee, and the dim glow of the studio equipment keeping me company. I managed to shake off the fear, convincing myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, just before my shift was over, the phone rang again. I felt this tightness in my chest as I picked it up, like every muscle in my body was telling me not to answer. But I did, and as soon as I heard his voice, my blood went cold. "I saw you looking," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You won't find me." "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know who I am," he said. And the worst part? The way he said it, like he'd been right there, watching me from the dark as I looked out into the empty lot. "Leave me alone, or I'm calling the police," I snapped. He chuckled softly. "They can't help you." I slammed the phone down, heart pounding, and locked the booth door out of instinct. It was a ridiculous thing to do, really. I was the only one in the building, and it was silent outside the booth. But that didn't stop me from feeling like I was being watched. Every creak and hum of the building felt magnified, like someone was breathing just out of sight. I didn't hear from him again that night. I waited, watching the clock until my shift ended, and when it was finally time to leave, I rushed out, barely looking over my shoulder. I kept expecting him to be standing out in the lot, watching me with that soft, knowing laugh. But there was no one there. I got in my car and drove home, still feeling his voice echoing in my head. I told myself it would be fine, that it was just some random guy trying to mess with me. But the next night, it started all over again. Just as the shift was settling in, the phone rang. I didn't even want to answer it, but I forced myself to pick up. "KXRF, I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. "Miss me?" His voice was soft, like he was speaking right into my ear. "You didn't park out back tonight." My heart nearly stopped. I had parked in the front that night, under the streetlight, hoping it would make me feel safer. I hadn't seen anyone around when I walked in, and yet somehow he knew. I wanted to scream, to tell him to leave me alone, but I was frozen. He kept calling, night after night. Sometimes he'd talk, telling me things he knew about me, details that were small, everyday things, like the color of my jacket or the type of sandwich I'd brought in. Sometimes he didn't say anything at all, just sat there breathing on the other end of the line. It was driving me insane. One night, I had enough. I went down to the basement where the phone lines connected, thinking I'd just pull the line and end it, at least for the night. I knew I'd get in trouble for it, but I couldn't take it anymore. But as I reached the basement, I froze. There, in the dim light, I saw something on the floor. A crumpled piece of paper. I picked it up, hand shaking. Written on it, in small, cramped handwriting, was a single line. "I told you I'd be close." I looked around, feeling my throat tighten. There was no one there, but I could feel it. Someone had been there, had left this for me. I backed away, heart racing, feeling like every shadow was hiding him, like he could be anywhere. I ran back upstairs, locked myself in the booth, and didn't leave until my shift was over. When I finally left that morning, the sun was just coming up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, somewhere close, maybe even in the building. I quit that job the next day. I don't know who he was, or how he knew so much, but I never wanted to find out. Every time I think about it, I can still hear his voice, low and soft, whispering in my ear. I don't know if he's still out there, waiting. I don't think I'll ever go back to find out. I've been working the night shift at a 24-hour laundromat for a while now. It's one of those places that's always open, no matter the time, no matter the day. It's quiet, mostly. The occasional person comes in to do their laundry late at night, but for the most part, it's just me cleaning and watching the clock crawl toward the end of my shift. I didn't mind it at first. The hours were long, but the job was easy enough. Just sweep the floors, wipe down the machines, and make sure everything was stocked and tidy for the next day. But after a few weeks, I started noticing him. The man who came in every single night, right around the same time. He wasn't like the usual customers who came in to actually do laundry. He'd walk in, look around like he was deciding which machine to use, but never put anything in. Not even a bag. He'd just sit in the back, near the corner by the vending machines, and stare at me. Just stare. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. I didn't want to jump to conclusions or make assumptions about anyone. Maybe he was just waiting for a friend. Maybe he was just passing through. But night after night, the same thing happened. He'd walk in, look around like he was deciding, then take a seat in that same corner, and just watch me. I'd be busy cleaning, pretending I didn't notice, but I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. The silence in the laundromat felt heavier with him there. The hum of the washers and dryers was louder than usual, like it was amplifying the tension. One night, around 2 in the morning, I decided enough was enough. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had to say something to him. I couldn't just keep looking over my shoulder and pretending I wasn't scared. He had been coming in for nearly a month, and I was starting to feel trapped. I walked over to him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Excuse me, sir," I said. "You can't just sit here. If you're not going to do laundry, I'll have to ask you to leave." He didn't even look at me right away. He just kept staring ahead, like I wasn't even there. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I stood there, waiting for him to respond. After a few long moments, he slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were dark, almost hollow. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at me, like he was seeing through me. "I know you," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I know where you live." I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I'd heard of people getting harassed before, but I never thought it would happen to me. I didn't know what to say. How could he know where I lived? I hadn't told anyone where I lived, not even my coworkers. I kept everything private, kept to myself. My heart started racing. My mind was going a million miles a minute, trying to figure out how he could have possibly known that. "How do you know where I live?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling despite myself. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was thin, almost like a smirk. He leaned back in his seat, the flickering light from the vending machines casting strange shadows across his face. "I've been watching you," he said, almost casually. "Every night. I know your routine. I know when you come in, and I know when you leave." I felt my stomach drop. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "You've been watching me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "For how long?" "Long enough," he replied, his smile widening. "Long enough to know everything about you." I took a step back, feeling the panic start to rise. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a mistake. Maybe he was just trying to mess with me, get a reaction. But something in his eyes, something in the way he said those words, made it feel all too real. The walls of the laundromat felt like they were closing in around me. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run. I wanted to call the police, but I was frozen, stuck in place. The silence between us stretched on, thick and suffocating. He didn't say anything else, but he didn't need to. His eyes told me everything. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying the fear he was causing. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found my voice again. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaky but determined. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just stared at me, his gaze never wavering. Then, after what felt like 1,000 years, he slowly stood up. I took a step back, instinctively trying to put some distance between us. "I don't want anything," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "I just like watching you. I like knowing where you are, where you'll be." The way he said it made my blood run cold. It was like he was savoring the moment, relishing the fear that was written all over my face. I don't know how long we stood there, just staring at each other. I could hear the hum of the machines, the distant sound of traffic outside, but it felt like everything had gone still, like time itself had stopped. Finally, he turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps slow and deliberate. I watched him, too afraid to move, too afraid to take my eyes off of him. He reached the door and paused, looking over his shoulder one last time. "I'll see you tomorrow night," he said. And then, without another word, he stepped outside and disappeared into the darkness. I don't know how long I stood there after he left. I think I just stared at the door, too scared to do anything else. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto the broom I had picked up at some point during the encounter. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should call the police, or if I should leave and never come back. But I stayed. I had to stay. I couldn't just leave, not without finishing my shift. So, I locked the door behind me, double-checked the security cameras, and kept working, trying to convince myself everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. The next night, he came back. Right on time, like always. This time, I didn't say anything. I didn't even look at him. I just kept my head down and tried to keep my hands from shaking. And every night after that, he came back. Sometimes he'd just sit there, not saying a word, just watching. Other times, he'd say something small, something that made my heart race. But I never confronted him again. I couldn't. I didn't know what he would do if I did. Eventually, I stopped showing up for the night shifts. I couldn't handle it anymore. I didn't want to be alone with him in that laundromat, with him knowing where I lived, watching me. I told my boss I had found another job, and that was that. I still don't know who he was, or why he chose me. But every time I close my eyes, I can see his face, and I hear his voice. "I'll see you tomorrow night." I've been working the night shift at a corporate office for a little over a year now. It's not a glamorous job, just cleaning up after the regular workers leave, making sure the place is ready for the next day. The building's pretty quiet at night, just me and the hum of the lights and the sound of the cleaning equipment. Most of the time, I just focus on my tasks and stay in my own head, listening to music or the radio as I go about my business. But there's one thing that's been bothering me for a while now. There's this office on the 3rd floor, room 312. It's not a big office, but it's always been locked after hours. It's the kind of place where the lights go off when everyone leaves. But recently, I've noticed that the light in that office is often still on when I get up there to clean. It's not like I'm looking for it. It's just hard to ignore when you're in the hallway, and the light shines through the crack under the door. I figured maybe I was just missing someone working late. People do it all the time in places like this. It started off slow. I'd see the light on, but I'd check the door and it would be locked, so I'd just carry on. A couple of nights later, the light was still on again, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone had forgotten to turn it off. But after a few weeks, it started feeling strange. I was getting a little more suspicious. I would be doing my rounds, and I'd pass by that office and see that damn light on again. The door would still be locked, but it bothered me more than it should have. One night, I decided I was going to do something about it. I had to find out what was going on. I went up there with my mop bucket and rag in hand, like I always did. But this time, when I walked past room 312, I stopped. The light was on. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I turned back and walked up to the door, standing in front of it for a long time before I knocked. I didn't expect anyone to answer, but I knocked anyway. No response. I didn't know why I felt so tense. It wasn't like I hadn't cleaned the office floors hundreds of times before, but something felt different tonight. I hesitated for a moment, then turned the handle. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open, and there, sitting in the dark, was a person. Just sitting there, perfectly still, staring at the corner of the room. They were in a chair, facing away from me, and their back was to the light, so their face was hidden. I stood there in the doorway for a second, just staring at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I thought maybe someone had just fallen asleep in the chair. It wasn't that uncommon. People sometimes get so wrapped up in their work that they just drop off without realizing it. I cleared my throat, trying to get their attention. "Excuse me, sir? This room is closed after hours." I wasn't sure what else to say. I didn't know if they worked here or if they were just someone who wandered in. But they didn't react. I stepped closer, my shoes squeaking against the floor, and again I called out, "Sir?" No response. I was starting to get uncomfortable now. My skin was crawling, and I felt like there was something wrong about this whole situation, but I didn't know what. I stepped further into the room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. "Hello?" I asked again, this time a little louder. Still nothing. It wasn't even that they were ignoring me, it was like they didn't even hear me at all. They just sat there in the dark, facing that corner, completely still. I took a deep breath, trying to keep myself calm. "Look, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave," I said, but my voice wavered. I didn't know why I was so nervous, but something about this person in the chair, it wasn't right. They were too still, too silent. Finally, I walked around the chair to get a better look at them, hoping I could just see their face and maybe make some sense of it. But when I stepped around, I froze. They were still staring at the wall. Their face was pale, almost ghostly under the dim light, and their eyes, they were wide open. Not blinking. Not moving. They looked empty. Hollow. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. "Hey," I said again, stepping back, my voice shaking now. "What's going on? Why are you in here?" The person didn't move an inch. Not even to acknowledge me. I took another step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I was starting to panic, but I knew I had to do something. I wasn't going to just leave them here, not like this. I reached out and lightly tapped their shoulder. That was when they turned to face me. The look in their eyes, it was like they didn't recognize me. Their face was gaunt, skin stretched tight over their bones, and they blinked for the first time since I'd entered the room. Their pupils were dilated, too wide for a normal person, and they didn't say anything at first. They just stared at me. I opened my mouth to speak, but they beat me to it. "You shouldn't be here," they said, their voice low and hoarse, like they hadn't spoken in days. I froze. That wasn't right. This person had been in here all this time, sitting in the dark, and now they were talking to me like I was the one who didn't belong. I felt my throat tighten. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but it was getting harder. "You're not supposed to be in here. You need to leave." The person didn't move, but their eyes followed me, tracking every little movement. It felt like they were studying me. trying to figure out what to do next. "I told you," they said. "You shouldn't be here." I could feel the blood draining from my face. Every inch of my body was screaming at me to leave, to get out of the room, but I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, frozen, staring at them. I forced myself to speak again. "Please, leave the room. I'm calling security." But they didn't respond. They didn't move. They just kept staring at me, like they were waiting for me to leave. After what felt like forever, I turned and bolted out of the room. My hands were shaking so much I had trouble holding my phone to call security. I didn't even look back until I was in the hallway, staring down the darkened corridor. I was afraid to go back, afraid to even be near that room again. I told security, but by the time they came up, the office was empty. No sign of anyone. No evidence that the person was even there. They checked the whole building, but they found nothing. No doors open. No strange sounds. Nothing out of place. That night, I finished my shift, but I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. The whole time, I kept thinking about the way that person looked at me, like they were waiting for something. Or maybe like they knew something I didn't. After that, I told the cleaning supervisor I was done with night shifts. I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't ever want to find out. I've been working day shifts ever since, but every time I pass that office, I can't help but wonder if they're still there, sitting in the dark, waiting. I've been working at the local mortuary for a little over 6 months now. It's not something I ever imagined doing, but after a few dead-end jobs, I took it. It's quiet work, mostly just me and the bodies, making sure everything's ready for the next day. The building isn't much to look at: dimly lit hallways, cold rooms, and the smell of formaldehyde in the air. It's a peaceful place, for the most part, and that's exactly what I needed. No distractions. No drama. At first, everything was routine. I checked the logs, prepped the bodies, and made sure the equipment was ready for the next shift. But after a couple of months, something strange started happening. There was a man. I remember the first time he came in. He was middle-aged, with a weary look about him, like he hadn't slept in days. He was polite, though, kept to himself, just asked to visit a relative who had passed away. He signed in, and I noticed it was a bit odd that the name he wrote down wasn't one I recognized, but that wasn't entirely unusual. Families sometimes come in to view loved ones at odd hours, especially at night. He didn't seem to mind that it was late, and I let him through. But as he left, I couldn't help but notice something strange. There was no record of the person he was visiting in the system. I checked the log, nothing. No name. No body number. I thought it was just a mistake, maybe an oversight or a paperwork error. So I didn't think much of it. But then, the next night, he came back. Same time, same polite demeanor. He signed in again, and again, he asked to visit the same relative. And once again, I checked the system. No name. No record. The room for that person was empty. I confronted him this time. I wasn't rude, but I had to ask, "Sir, I'm sorry, but I don't see any record of the person you're asking to visit. Are you sure you're at the right place?" He looked at me like I just asked him a ridiculous question, his face twitching slightly. "I've been here every night," he said, voice tight. "You should know who I'm talking about. I need to see him." I told him that the body wasn't in the system, that I couldn't find anything on it. But he kept insisting, getting more agitated as I spoke. "I know he's here," he repeated, louder now, and then he leaned in close to me. I've been visiting him every night. He's here. You have to let me see him." Something about the way he said that sent a chill through me. It wasn't just desperation. It was something else. Something unsettling. I wanted to turn him away, but something made me hesitate. I couldn't exactly explain why, but I did let him in. When I let him to the viewing room, the place was quiet, like always. There were a couple of bodies in the rooms, and the lights flickered just a bit, as they sometimes did, but there was no sign of the person he was talking about. I couldn't figure out why he was so insistent. He just stood there, staring at the empty spot where the body should have been. His face was unreadable, tense. For a moment, I thought he might start crying. But then he turned to me, his expression twisted in confusion. "You're lying," he whispered, his voice low but sharp. "You're hiding him from me." I backed up, feeling a wave of unease. I didn't know what to make of it. I wanted to call security, but something stopped me. I thought maybe I had missed something. Maybe I had overlooked a note or a change in the system. I wasn't about to tell him that though, not when he looked at me like that. "I'm sorry, but there's no one here by that name," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you'd like, I can help you find the records." But he wasn't listening. His eyes darted around the room like he was looking for something. He started pacing, muttering to himself. "He's here. I know he's here. You can't hide him from me." I felt like I was standing too close to something dangerous. I wanted to walk away, but I couldn't. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he was acting. Like he was losing control, like the air around him was thickening. I had to get him out of there. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you're not going to cooperate," I said, more firmly this time, trying to make my voice sound in control. He froze for a second, then slowly turned to face me. There was something in his eyes now, something I hadn't seen before. Something cold. Empty. "You're not going to stop me," he said, his voice low and slow, almost a whisper. Then he reached into his jacket, and I immediately stepped back. My heart started pounding. But he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a photograph. It was old, worn, the edges curling. It was a picture of a man, someone I didn't recognize. He held it out to me, eyes glued to mine. "Tell me," he said, his voice thick, like he was choking on his own words. "Does this look familiar to you?" I took the photograph from him, almost against my will. I studied it for a moment, but there was nothing in my memory. No connection. No reason why it should feel important. The man in the photo looked perfectly ordinary, just an older guy in a suit. But something about it, it made the room feel smaller, colder. "I don't know who this is," I said, trying not to sound too rattled. He stared at me for what felt like forever, and for a moment, I thought he was going to snap. But then he pulled away, shoved the photo back into his jacket, and walked out of the room without another word. I didn't know what to think. My heart was racing, my palms sweating. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't pinpoint what exactly. I locked up the viewing room, made sure everything was in order, and went back to the front desk, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. But that wasn't the last time he came back. Every night for the next week, the same man showed up at the same time. And every time, he asked to see the same person, even though no one in the system was listed as his relative. Each night, he grew more desperate, more erratic. His behavior was starting to scare me, and the worst part was, no matter how many times I checked the records, the body he was asking about was never there. The name he gave me, nothing. The person he was visiting was a ghost in the system. One night, I finally called the police after he came in again, but by the time they arrived, he had disappeared into the night. I haven't seen him since, but I still don't understand what happened. I don't know who he was visiting, or why he was so convinced that the body was here. Every now and then, I still hear his voice in my head, asking why I'm lying. I still see that photo. I still feel the weight of his gaze when he looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. I had just started my second year of college, and everything seemed to be going well. I was excited about my classes and felt optimistic about the new semester. One class, in particular, was a large lecture that took place in a big hall with tiered seating. The professor was engaging, and the subject matter fascinated me, so I was eager to attend every session. As the weeks went by, I began to notice something strange. Each time I left the lecture hall, I would return to find my belongings rearranged. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. Maybe I left my notes in a different spot or shifted my backpack without realizing it. But then it started to feel too odd to dismiss. I would leave my laptop open on my desk while I went to get a drink of water or use the restroom, and every time I came back, my notes would be in a different order, or my bag would be slightly unzipped. I brushed it off, thinking I might have a case of paranoia. After all, it was a crowded lecture hall, and it was entirely possible someone else had accidentally bumped into my belongings. But as it continued, I felt the unease creeping in. One day, I decided to take a closer look. I stayed in my seat until almost everyone had left the hall. When I gathered my things, I realized my laptop was open, and the screen had a note on it. Nice notes, it read. It sent chills through me. I looked around to see if anyone was watching. The room was empty, and the only sound was the echo of my footsteps as I hurried out. I was too unsettled to focus on my studies that night. I kept thinking about the note and the feeling of being watched. The next day, I decided to take action. I set up my laptop to record video while I left the room. I wanted to see if I could catch whoever was messing with my things. After setting up the camera, I left the hall once again, doing my best to appear casual. I went to grab lunch and sat in the dining hall, trying to distract myself from the anxiety. I spent the whole time fiddling with my phone, checking the time over and over. After what felt like an eternity, I returned to the lecture hall, heart pounding. I pulled my laptop out and started the video. My fingers trembled slightly as I pressed play. The first few minutes showed nothing. The room was empty, just as I had left it. Then, just when I thought I was going to be disappointed, a figure slipped through the doorway. It was a student I vaguely recognized from my class. He often sat near the back and rarely spoke. He approached my desk, glancing around as if making sure no one was watching. My heart sank as I watched him lean down to examine my bag. He unzipped it slowly, carefully looking inside. I felt a knot in my stomach. What was he doing? Was he looking for something specific? He pulled out my notebook, flipping through the pages before putting it back. Then he turned his attention to my laptop, and I held my breath. I could see the glint of something shiny in his hand. He pulled out a small notepad and began writing something. He seemed to take his time, writing deliberately. I felt sick with worry, wondering what he could possibly be scribbling down. He finished writing and placed the note on the keyboard, making sure it was visible. After that, he glanced around again before slipping out of the room. I quickly paused the video, my hand shaking as I replayed the moment. I needed to see the note. I didn't want to face the potential implications, but I had to know. I clicked on the video again, my heart racing as I watched him leave. I took a deep breath and leaned closer to my laptop, finally ready to see what he had written. My stomach dropped as I saw the note. Why do you keep your things here? You should be careful. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What did he mean by that? My instinct was to panic. I felt exposed and vulnerable, like I was being stalked without any control over the situation. I immediately closed my laptop and left the hall, determination rising within me. I decided to report the incident to campus security. I showed them the video and the note. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. They assured me they would look into it. I felt a flicker of hope as they promised to investigate the matter. For the next few days, I stayed on high alert. I didn't leave my belongings unattended, and I avoided the lecture hall whenever possible. I focused on my classes but found it hard to concentrate. The unease sat heavy on my shoulders, and I constantly scanned the room for him. It felt like I was in a suspenseful thriller, waiting for the next moment of tension to unfold. Eventually, a couple of days later, I received a call from campus security. They informed me that they had spoken to the student and he had admitted to going through my things. They assured me he would be facing disciplinary action. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but also a lingering fear. It was unsettling to think that he had been so close to me for so long, watching me without my knowledge. In the following weeks, I changed my routine. I started sitting closer to the front of the class, avoiding the back rows where he usually sat. I kept my belongings close and remained vigilant. It took time, but eventually, I began to feel safe again. Although I never saw him again, the memory lingered. I learned a lesson about trust and awareness, and while I eventually returned to my routine, I always remained cautious. I knew that sometimes, things are not as they seem, and it is important to listen to your instincts. I brought my car into this little repair shop off the highway. It was one of those places that didn't look like much from the outside, all beat up and run down, but it was the closest option, and I'd been hearing weird sounds coming from my engine for a couple of days. Figured it was safer to just get it checked out before it got worse. The place was almost empty, and the only people around were a couple of mechanics sitting in the corner, leaning back in their chairs, talking low. I couldn't catch much of what they were saying, but I got the feeling it wasn't exactly car-related. Still, when I walked in, they both stopped talking and looked at me like they'd just been caught doing something. One of them got up and walked over, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He was older, with a thick mustache and tired eyes, looking like he'd been working there all his life. The other guy was younger, in his 20s maybe, with a shaved head and a nervous look, like he didn't want to be there any more than I did. I told them about the noise my car was making, a kind of rattling sound under the hood. The older guy nodded, looking at me with this strange expression that I couldn't quite read. "You came to the right place," he said, then glanced over at the younger guy with a slight smirk. It felt odd, like there was something else in that look, something I wasn't in on. They took my keys and told me to have a seat in the waiting area. The older one walked out to check my car, and I watched him through the glass door as he popped the hood, leaning over with his head down, talking to himself or maybe just muttering about the engine. But then I noticed the younger one wasn't with him. He'd stayed inside, standing a little ways from me, watching me, like he was trying to figure something out. I asked him if something was wrong, and he blinked like he hadn't expected me to talk to him. He shook his head, looking away. "Nah, it's nothing," he said, but his voice sounded tense, almost too casual, like he was trying hard to act normal. I sat down, keeping an eye on him, and that's when I heard them talking again. The older guy was back now, and the two of them were just out of earshot, but I caught bits and pieces of it. They were talking about my car, but it was in this way that felt wrong. I heard the younger guy say something like, "You sure he's the right one?" And the older guy muttered back, "Yeah, he is. Look at him." He's in the right place. It made my stomach drop. I didn't know what they meant by that, but I felt this chill go up my spine. I stood up and asked them if they needed anything else, trying to play it off, but the older guy just glanced at me with this blank stare, like he hadn't expected me to overhear. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. They just looked at each other, and then the older guy gave me this easy smile. "Nothing, just the car. We'll have it fixed up in no time. You should sit back down, though, and relax. It'll take a while." There was something in the way he said it that made me feel trapped. I was in a small shop, barely any people around, and it was getting late. My gut told me to leave, to just grab my keys and drive off, but then I thought about my car. I didn't know what was wrong with it, and I didn't want to risk breaking down somewhere even worse. I tried to keep calm, sitting back down, but my mind was racing. I kept an eye on them, watching as they went back to my car, talking low again. Every now and then, they'd glance back toward the shop, just enough for me to notice. It felt like they were sizing me up, like they were making some kind of plan. About 15 minutes passed, and the younger guy came back in, saying he needed my license and insurance information. I didn't see why he'd need it just to check on a rattling sound, but I handed it over anyway, trying not to show any hesitation. He didn't say a word after that, just took my info and disappeared into a back room. I couldn't sit still anymore. I walked outside, hoping the fresh air would help clear my head, but when I stepped out, the older guy was standing by my car, looking down at the open engine. His face was calm, almost too calm, and he barely acknowledged me, just nodding as if to say he was still working. I tried to keep it light, asked him if he'd found the problem yet, and he finally looked at me, but his eyes were cold, distant. "Takes time," he said, his voice flat. "Might be more complicated than we thought." I was about to tell him I'd take my car somewhere else when I noticed something odd. My car hood was closed now, and he was leaning on it, like he was trying to keep me from looking inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something, that whatever he'd been doing to my car had nothing to do with fixing it. I told him I'd take the car as is, that I'd changed my mind, but he didn't move. Just crossed his arms, blocking me from getting close. "Already started," he said, his voice low. "Wouldn't be safe to drive it like this now." My heart was pounding, and I didn't know what to do. I turned to head back inside, planning to call someone, anyone, just to have someone know where I was. But as I reached for my phone, the younger guy stepped out of the back room, holding my license and insurance, and he stopped right in front of me, blocking the door. He was smiling, that same odd smile the older guy had, and it hit me just how alone I was, how far I was from anything else. I could feel my pulse hammering in my chest as I tried to keep my voice calm. "Look," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, "I just want my car back. I don't need it fixed." The older guy moved closer, resting his hand on my car's hood. "You're in the right place," he said again, like that meant something. The younger one just stared at me, waiting for my reaction. I didn't wait. I darted around them, heading toward the main road, hoping a car would pass by, someone who might stop. They didn't follow me, but I could feel their eyes on my back. I walked until I was far enough that they were just two dark figures by the car. I kept moving, not stopping until I saw headlights coming from down the road. I waved down the driver, explaining as quickly as I could that I needed help. He let me use his phone to call for a tow, and I watched from a distance as the two men stood by my car, watching me until the tow truck showed up. When the driver got there, they tried to say it was fine, that they were almost done with the repairs, but I refused to listen. I climbed into the tow truck, and we pulled out of there, leaving my car in the shop. It didn't matter. I'd get it back some other way. I moved to a new neighborhood last summer, looking for a fresh start after a tough year. The houses were charming, lined with trees, and there was a sense of community that I hoped would help me feel at home. I felt optimistic as I unloaded boxes from the moving truck, the sun shining brightly overhead. On my first evening, a neighbor came by. Her name was Linda, an older woman with a warm smile and a kind demeanor. She brought over a plate of cookies, freshly baked. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she exclaimed, her voice bright. I thanked her, happy to meet someone friendly. The cookies were delicious, and we chatted for a while. I felt good, thinking this might be the start of something nice. The next day, a man named Tom knocked on my door. He was in his 40s, tall, with a friendly face. He introduced himself and handed me a small potted plant. "It's a gift for you. Just a little something to brighten your home," he said. I appreciated the gesture, though it felt a bit odd. I had never received gifts from neighbors before. Over the next week, more neighbors came by. A couple down the street gave me a bottle of wine, while another family offered me homemade jam. I started to feel a little overwhelmed. Each gift was thoughtful, yet there was something about the frequency and personal nature of these gestures that made me uncomfortable. I had just moved in, and I hardly knew any of them. I tried to be polite and accept their kindness. Yet, I noticed how they seemed to know a bit too much about me. One neighbor, Sarah, asked about my job as if she had been following my social media. I had barely shared anything with anyone. I brushed it off, thinking it was just friendly curiosity. But the way they spoke made me uneasy. As the days passed, the gifts kept coming. A fruit basket appeared on my porch one morning. Another day, I found a handmade quilt draped over my mailbox. Each time I returned home, it felt like I was stepping into a strange world. Their gestures were meant to be warm, but it began to feel suffocating. One evening, as I sat on my porch, Tom came over again. He stood too close and asked me personal questions about my life. "Do you have any family nearby? Friends?" I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I answered politely but kept my distance. I just wanted to enjoy the quiet, but he did not seem to take the hint. That weekend, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. I thought a stroll would help me feel more settled. As I walked through the neighborhood, I noticed Linda was in her garden. She waved and shouted, "Come over for a glass of lemonade." I hesitated but felt it would be rude to refuse. I walked over, thinking a quick chat would be harmless. When I arrived, she was preparing a large pitcher. Her yard was filled with colorful flowers, and it felt almost too perfect. As we sat on her porch, she asked me about my childhood. It was strange to talk about my past with someone I barely knew. As I finished my drink, I noticed how Linda seemed to hang onto my every word, her eyes wide with interest. "You know, you should come to our neighborhood barbecue next week," she suggested. "Everyone will be there. It will be fun." I smiled politely but did not commit. I wanted to step back from all this. That night, I received a text from Tom. He asked if I would join him for coffee the next day. I had never given him my number. It sent a chill down my spine. I replied, saying I was busy, hoping he would understand. The next day, I found a note taped to my door from Sarah. "Missed you at the garden party yesterday. We will have to catch up soon." It felt invasive. I had no idea what garden party she was talking about. I considered packing my things and leaving, but I did not want to seem dramatic. As I tried to distance myself, the gifts only increased. A knitted scarf appeared on my porch. Another time, I found a box of chocolates left outside my door. Each time, I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I tried to avoid them, but they would often stop by. It felt as if I was trapped in a bizarre social web. One afternoon, I returned home to find a small group of neighbors waiting on my porch. They were all smiles, holding plates of food. "Surprise!" they shouted. They had prepared a welcome feast. I stood there, stunned. I appreciated their intentions, but it felt overwhelming. I just wanted space, a moment to breathe. I attempted to express my gratitude, but also my need for privacy. "Thank you, everyone, but I think I need some time to settle in." "It is all very kind, but it is a bit much." They nodded, but I saw a flicker of disappointment in their eyes. I thought that would be enough, but the next day, I found Linda waiting outside my house, holding a casserole. "Just wanted to check on you," she said cheerfully. I felt trapped. I thanked her, taking the dish without looking her in the eyes. I returned inside, the casserole in my hands feeling like a weight. I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. It was becoming clear to me that my attempts to withdraw only seemed to pull them closer. The following week, I went grocery shopping in another town, hoping for a little anonymity. As I pushed my cart through the aisles, I felt a sense of relief. It was a small escape from the constant reminders of my neighbors. But as I turned a corner, I nearly bumped into Tom. He grinned widely, as if he had been expecting me. "Fancy seeing you here. We should grab lunch sometime," he said, his tone cheerful. Panic rushed through me. "I really need to get going," I replied quickly. I could feel my heart pounding as I rushed past him, the feeling of being hunted creeping back. I had to get away from this all. That night, I sat in my living room, trying to gather my thoughts. I could not shake the feeling that the situation was escalating. My phone buzzed. It was a group message from my neighbors. They planned a big welcome party for me. The date was set for the following weekend. I felt my stomach drop. I spent the next few days preparing to escape. I packed essentials and arranged for a friend to help me move. I had to leave this place before it consumed me. I did not want to confront them. I wanted to slip away unnoticed. On the day of the party, I felt a mix of fear and relief as I loaded my car. I glanced at the house, expecting to see them gathering outside, but it was quiet. I drove away, feeling the weight lift with each mile. I did not look back. Once I reached my friend's place, I felt free again. The stress melted away as I settled in, knowing I had made the right choice. It was strange to leave so suddenly, but I knew I could not stay in that neighborhood. It was too much, too overwhelming. Eventually, I found a new apartment, far from those well-meaning but intrusive neighbors. I could breathe again, without the feeling of being watched. I learned that kindness can sometimes feel like a cage, and it was better to choose solitude than be surrounded by a crowd that would not let go. It was late one evening when I found myself driving through a small town, feeling the hunger gnaw at my stomach. I had been on the road for hours, and the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky dark and foreboding. The diner stood out like a beacon against the night, a warm light spilling from its windows. It looked inviting enough, so I parked my car and stepped inside. The door jingled softly as I entered, but as soon as I crossed the threshold, I felt an unsettling hush fall over the place. It was as if someone had hit a pause button on the world. I glanced around, my eyes meeting those of the patrons. A group of older men sat in a corner booth, their laughter halted mid-sentence. A couple at the counter turned to stare at me, their forks suspended in midair. Even the waitress paused, her mouth slightly agape as she stood behind the counter. I felt my cheeks heat under their scrutiny, but I brushed it off as me being overly sensitive. I had traveled enough to know that small towns often had a way of making newcomers feel like outsiders. I approached the counter, forcing a smile as I took a seat. The waitress eventually shook herself out of her stupor and walked over, her expression unreadable. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady but flat. I scanned the menu, trying to ignore the way everyone was watching me. "I'll have a cheeseburger and fries," I replied, attempting to keep my tone light. "And a coffee, please." She raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something concerned, crossing her face before she jotted it down. I noticed she hesitated before moving away, glancing back at me as she disappeared into the kitchen. The murmurs that had filled the diner before I arrived faded into silence, replaced by the sound of pots and pans clanging in the back. I sat there, trying to shake off the strange feeling gnawing at my insides. The burger would be here soon, I thought. I pulled out my phone, hoping to distract myself, but even the flickering screen could not drown out the sensation of being watched. I could feel their eyes boring into me, piercing through the haze of the diner's dim lighting. I turned to look out the window, pretending to be interested in the view of the empty street outside. The night was still, the only sounds coming from the diner itself. A chill crept up my spine, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me, feeling a sense of dread begin to settle in my stomach. When the waitress returned, she placed my coffee in front of me without making eye contact. I tried to catch her gaze, hoping for some indication that everything was normal, but she avoided my eyes. I took a sip of the bitter brew, its warmth spreading through me, and finally, my burger arrived, steaming and glistening with melted cheese. As I bit into it, I noticed that the chatter around me had completely ceased. Every other diner was still, their eyes locked on me as if I were some sort of spectacle. I chewed slowly, the taste of the burger fading as the silence enveloped me. It was unsettling. I looked around again, trying to gauge what was happening. The men in the corner were rigid, their hands clenching their forks, the couple at the counter barely breathing. Suddenly, they all stood up in unison, as if they had rehearsed this exact moment. My heart raced. I was trapped, surrounded by a sea of eyes, all focused solely on me. I felt exposed, a feeling I had never experienced before in a public place. I swallowed hard, suddenly unsure if I was in a diner or a stage play where I had not read the script. "Is there a problem?" I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. I did not know what else to say. Their silence hung heavy in the air, and I felt the weight of their collective gaze pressing down on me. The waitress finally spoke, her voice low but clear. "You should leave," she said, her expression still unreadable, yet the seriousness of her tone sent a shiver through me. "Why?" I asked, bewildered. "What's going on?" The diner was still, and the silence grew louder. I caught a glimpse of fear in her eyes before she glanced back at the other customers. It was a look that made my skin crawl. "You don't belong here," one of the men finally spoke, his voice gravelly and rough, like gravel crunching underfoot. His words struck me like a physical blow, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I put down my burger, my appetite evaporating in an instant. "I'm just passing through," I said, my voice a shaky whisper. "I mean no harm." The man stepped closer, and I instinctively slid back on my stool, trying to create distance. He looked around the room, and I followed his gaze, realizing the other patrons had begun to shift as if they were preparing to move. My instinct screamed at me to run. "I really should be going," I stammered, trying to rise from my seat. I could feel the air thicken around me, a tension I had never encountered before. The waitress stepped forward, urgency in her eyes. "Just go," she urged, her voice a little louder now. "Please." Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket, fumbling with my things, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced around, seeing the crowd still standing, all of them fixated on me, their expressions a mixture of fear and something else I couldn't place. I dashed for the door, feeling as if I were in a dream, the diner blurring behind me as I pushed through. I burst outside, the cool night air hitting my face like a splash of cold water. I quickly made my way to my car, the thumping of my heart echoing in my ears. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers trembling. I glanced back at the diner, and I saw them watching me through the window, their faces like shadows, expressionless and cold. As I drove away, the unease didn't dissipate. The road stretched out before me, illuminated by the headlights, but I could still feel their eyes on me, that terrible stillness filling my mind. I had never felt so unwelcome, so alien in a place that should have felt safe. I vowed never to return to that town again, its diner forever etched in my mind as a reminder of a night where I was not only an outsider but something that was hunted. It was around 10:30 when the first call came in. The office was quiet, just the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional clicking of my keyboard. I was halfway through my night shift, working late like I always did. My job at this small office was usually boring but predictable. I liked the quiet, and it helped me focus. I'd been answering emails when the phone rang. I remember thinking it was odd because the office line never rang that late. Most people didn't even know I worked the night shift alone. I picked up the receiver without really thinking about it, expecting maybe a wrong number. "Hello?" I said. There was a pause. Nothing but silence on the other end. Just when I was about to hang up, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate breathing. My skin prickled, and I pulled the phone away from my ear, looking at it like that would help. The silence stretched for what felt like forever before the line finally went dead. I hung up, feeling a little uneasy, but I brushed it off. Wrong number, I told myself. Probably some idiot playing a prank. I tried to shake it off, went back to typing, but I couldn't focus. The office felt too quiet now. I glanced at the clock. Only 15 minutes had passed since the call, but I could feel the seconds dragging. Then, the phone rang again. I picked it up a bit slower this time. "Hello?" A voice. This time, there was a voice. Low, almost like a whisper, but I could hear it. "You're wearing a black sweater." I froze. I looked down at my sweater, the one I always wore when the office got cold. The words hung in the air, cold and deliberate. "What?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're wearing a black sweater, and your hair is pulled back," the voice said again, clearer this time. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Whoever this was, they could see me. I felt my heart start to race, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I looked around the office, scanning the dark corners, the doorways, the windows. But the blinds were down. I couldn't see out, and as far as I knew, no one could see in. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to sound tough, but my voice was shaking. The line clicked, and the call ended. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. I stood up, walking to the door that led out to the hallway. I checked the lock. It was secure. The front door was the only way in, and it required a key card after hours. No one should have been able to get inside without one. I told myself it was just a prank, maybe someone from the office messing with me. But my gut was telling me something else, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I sat back down at my desk, but I couldn't focus on my work. I kept glancing at the phone, half expecting it to ring again. I looked around the room, scanning every corner, every shadow. The office wasn't big, just a few desks, filing cabinets, and the small break room in the back. But it felt massive right then, too much space for me to cover with just my eyes. My pulse hadn't slowed down, and I was getting more and more anxious. I could feel sweat start to gather on my palms. I thought about calling my boss, or maybe even the police, but what would I tell them? Someone called me and described my clothes. It sounded ridiculous in my head. Then the phone rang again. I jumped, nearly knocking over my coffee. My hand hovered over the receiver, not wanting to answer but knowing I had to. Slowly, I picked it up. "I like the way you've tied your hair," the voice said immediately. My blood turned to ice. My hands flew up to my head, feeling the ponytail I'd pulled my hair into just before my shift started. Whoever was calling me, they weren't guessing. They were seeing me, right then, in real time. I stood up from my chair so fast it nearly tipped over. "Who the hell are you?" I shouted into the phone, my voice shaking. Silence again. Just the sound of breathing, slow and measured, like whoever it was wanted me to know they were calm. The opposite of how I felt. "Where are you?" I demanded. The line went dead again. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing. I ran to the windows, pulling the blinds back and peering out into the parking lot. It was dark, barely lit by a single streetlight near the entrance. I couldn't see anyone. No cars besides mine. No movement. Nothing. I went back to the door, checking the lock again, making sure it was still secure. It was. The office was locked up tight. There was no way anyone could get in without me knowing. But that didn't matter. Someone was watching me. Somehow, they were watching me, and they were close enough to know exactly what I was wearing, exactly how I looked. I grabbed my phone, my personal one, and dialed 911. My fingers were trembling so badly that I had to press the buttons twice. 911, what's your emergency? I explained what was happening, trying to stay calm, but my words were coming out in a rush. The operator asked me to slow down, to explain again. I told her I was alone in the office, that someone was calling me, describing what I was wearing, watching me somehow. "Are you sure the building is secure?" she asked. "Yes," I said, glancing at the locked door again. "There's no way in without a key card. I'm the only one here." "Stay on the line," she said. "We're sending someone over." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, pacing the room, the phone pressed to my ear. I kept looking at the windows, half expecting to see a face peering in. But there was nothing. Just the empty parking lot outside. Then my office phone rang again. I stared at it, my heart pounding. The operator was still on the line with me, but my eyes were locked on the office phone, its shrill ring cutting through the quiet. "Are you still there?" the operator asked. "Yes," I whispered, barely able to speak. The phone rang again. "Don't answer it," she said firmly. "Just stay where you are. Officers are on their way." But I couldn't help myself. I had to know. I had to hear what they were going to say this time. I reached out with a shaking hand and picked up the receiver. "Stop calling me," I shouted, my voice cracking. There was a long pause. Then, that same low voice. "You shouldn't have done that." I froze, my blood running cold. "What?" "You shouldn't have called them." The phone went dead again. I dropped the receiver like it had burned me. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I staggered to the window again, pulling the blinds aside, searching the darkness outside for any sign of movement. But the parking lot was empty. No one there. Except there was. Someone had to be out there, watching me. I backed away from the window, my back pressing up against the wall. I didn't feel safe anymore, not even with the doors locked. Whoever this was, they knew too much. They were too close. The operator was still on the line, telling me to stay calm, that help was coming. But I couldn't think straight. My thoughts were racing, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, I saw the flash of red and blue lights through the blinds. The police had arrived. I ran to the door, unlocking it as quickly as I could. 2 officers came inside, their faces serious, asking me questions. I told them everything, about the calls, about the voice describing what I was wearing, about the way they knew I'd called for help. They checked the building, every room, every closet, every corner. But they found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No one outside. No one watching. The phone calls, though, they believed me about that. They checked the logs and saw the incoming calls, but there was no trace. No number. Whoever it was had blocked it. I never found out who was watching me that night. The police couldn't track the calls, and the office was secure, just like I thought. But I quit that job the next day. I moved into that apartment about a year ago. It was nothing fancy, just a basic 1-bedroom place in an old building. The rent was cheap, and the neighborhood was decent, so I didn't have much to complain about. It was the kind of place where people kept to themselves, and I liked that. I wasn't the type to make small talk with neighbors, and I appreciated that no one tried to make it. The knocking started maybe 2 months after I settled in. It wasn't constant at first, just here and there. The first time I heard it, it was around 2 in the morning. I remember waking up to this faint, rhythmic knock. It wasn't loud, more like someone gently tapping their knuckles on the door. I was groggy and disoriented, so I didn't think much of it. I figured someone had the wrong apartment. It stopped after a minute or 2, and I went back to sleep. But it kept happening. Every few nights, always around the same time, middle of the night, when everything was quiet. The knocking would start, soft at first, then a little louder, like whoever was on the other side was getting impatient. I started to get annoyed, thinking maybe it was some drunk coming home late, confused about which apartment was theirs. I never got out of bed to check. I'd just lie there, listening, waiting for it to stop, which it always did. About a month in, I mentioned it to the building manager. He was an older guy, probably in his 50s, who lived on the first floor. He shrugged it off, said he hadn't heard anything like that from anyone else. Told me it was probably just pipes or the building settling, something like that. I didn't buy it, but I let it go. There wasn't much he could do about it. The knocking kept up, though. Always late at night. Sometimes it was so soft I'd wonder if I was imagining it. Other times, it was loud enough to wake me up, pounding like someone was trying to get in. I started to get paranoid. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to start. It was like I knew it was coming, like I could feel it. Then one night, something changed. The knocking was louder than usual, more aggressive. I was wide awake this time, and for some reason, I felt this overwhelming urge to check. I'd never looked through the peephole before. I always stayed in bed, waiting for it to pass, but that night, something in me snapped. I was tired of feeling watched, of being woken up by this strange, endless knocking. I got up slowly, heart pounding, and crept to the door. The knocking stopped as soon as I got close. I stood there for a second, hand hovering over the doorknob, hesitating. Then, I leaned forward and peered through the peephole. There was no one there. The hallway was empty. I let out a breath, half relieved, half confused. I stood there for a minute, just staring, trying to shake the weird feeling in my gut. Then, I went back to bed. A few nights later, it happened again. Same thing, loud, frantic knocking. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and rushed to the door. As soon as I got close, the knocking stopped. I looked through the peephole, expecting the hallway to be empty again. But this time, there was someone standing right in front of my door. I froze. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Whoever it was, they were standing so close that I couldn't see their face. Just the top of their head, dark hair matted down like they'd been out in the rain. I could see their shoulders, their arms hanging by their sides, but they weren't moving. They were just standing there, inches away from the door, completely still. I backed away slowly, not making a sound, trying to keep my breathing steady. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Open the door? I wasn't sure what was happening, but something told me not to make a move, not to make any noise. I crept back to my bedroom, shut the door softly, and sat on the edge of the bed, listening. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, waiting for something else to happen. But it didn't. The knocking didn't come back, and I didn't hear anyone in the hallway. It was like whoever it was had just disappeared. The next morning, I left the apartment as soon as the sun came up. I didn't want to be there anymore. I went to work, tried to focus on anything else, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was that? Why were they standing so close to my door, and why didn't they say anything? That night, I didn't want to go home. I stayed late at the office, dragged out errands, anything to avoid going back. But eventually, I had to. When I got back to the apartment, everything seemed normal. No weird vibes, no strange sounds. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, as soon as I turned up the lights and lay down, the knocking started again. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't just lie there, waiting for it to stop. I got up, crept to the door, and looked through the peephole. They were there again. Same person, standing just inches away from the door. This time, I could see more. Their face was pressed up against the door, their eyes staring straight into the peephole. It was like they knew I was there, like they were watching me through the other side. I stumbled back, my heart racing, trying not to make a sound. I backed into the bedroom, grabbed my phone, and called the police. I didn't care if it made me look paranoid. Something was seriously wrong. When the cops showed up, the person was gone. They searched the building, checked the security cameras, but there was no sign of anyone. The cameras didn't even catch anyone coming in or out of the building. It didn't make sense. After that, I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. I didn't go back for a few days, but eventually, I had to. I couldn't afford to break my lease, and part of me thought maybe it was over, maybe whoever it was had moved on. But the first night I was back, the knocking started again. This time, I didn't check. I didn't get out of bed. I just lay there, frozen, listening. The knocking was softer this time, almost like they were tapping their fingers against the door, but it was relentless. It went on for hours. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, waiting for it to stop. When the sun came up, I packed my things and left for good. I never went back to that apartment. I broke the lease, lost my deposit, didn't care. I couldn't stay there anymore. I still don't know who it was, or what they wanted. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that knocking in my head. And I wonder if they're still out there, waiting. I was driving through this small town I'd never been to before. I wasn't planning on staying or anything, just passing through, but I saw this little church and felt like I should stop. I'd been going through a rough time, just needed some quiet or something familiar, I guess. The church wasn't big or fancy, just an old building with a sign out front that said Sunday service. It was starting soon, so I figured I'd go in. There weren't many cars in the lot, but I thought maybe it was just a small congregation. When I stepped inside, the place was quiet, almost too quiet. I'd expected to hear some music or people talking, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my shoes on the wooden floor. The whole church had this dim lighting, and the air smelled kind of stale, like it hadn't been aired out in a while. I saw about 15 or 20 people sitting in the pews, spread out, not really talking to each other. Nobody even looked up when I came in. I walked down the aisle and took a seat near the back, figured I'd just stay for a bit and then leave if I didn't feel comfortable. But then I started noticing the way people were acting. They weren't really praying or talking, just sitting there, staring straight ahead. I kept glancing around, trying to catch someone's eye or give a little nod like you do, but every time I looked at someone, they'd just look away real fast. It felt weird, like they were purposely ignoring me. I thought about leaving right then, but the service was about to start, and I figured I'd just sit through a bit of it before heading out. When the pastor came out, he didn't really seem like any pastor I'd ever seen before. He didn't have the kind of welcoming look you'd expect. He was tall, thin, had this worn-out black suit on, and his face was pale, with these deep-set eyes that made it look like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't smile or greet the congregation, just stood up at the pulpit and started talking in this flat voice. There was no opening hymn or prayer, just him speaking. He was saying something about devotion, but it wasn't like any sermon I'd heard before. It felt off, like the words didn't fit right. It was hard to explain. He'd keep pausing, looking around the room like he was making sure everyone was paying attention. Every time he did, I felt this uneasy feeling in my stomach, like I shouldn't have come there at all. After about 10 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up quietly and started to walk toward the back. But before I could reach the doors, I noticed two men standing on either side of the exit. They hadn't been there when I came in, I was sure of it. They were big guys, both wearing these dark suits that looked almost identical. They were just standing there, staring straight ahead, but I could tell they were watching me. I tried to act casual and walked a little slower, not wanting to draw any attention to myself, but just as I was a few feet away from the doors, I heard the pastor's voice echo through the room. "Where are you going?" he asked. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence in a way that made everyone turn and look at me. I froze, not sure what to say. I was just stepping out for a moment, I replied, my voice sounding shaky even to me. The pastor didn't say anything else, but I noticed that everyone in the pews was now looking at me. Their expressions didn't look concerned or curious, they looked blank, like they were waiting for something. I took another step toward the door, but the two men moved closer, just enough that I knew they weren't going to let me through. I looked back toward the pastor, and he was just staring at me with that same flat expression, like he was studying me. "I think I need to leave," I said, louder this time, but nobody moved or said a word. It was like I was trapped in some kind of strange theater where everyone knew the script but me. The pastor took a step down from the pulpit, slowly walking toward me, his shoes clicking against the floor. "You should stay," he said. "We haven't even gotten to the important part yet." My heart was racing now. I glanced at the windows, thinking maybe I could get out that way, but they were high up and had thick glass. There wasn't a chance I could break through. I took another step back, and the two men at the door stepped closer, blocking my path completely. I was starting to panic, and I didn't care if it showed. "Let me out," I said, my voice breaking a little. "I'm not staying here." Nobody answered. The pastor stopped walking and just stood there, watching me, his head tilted slightly like he was amused or something. I didn't know what else to do, so I turned and ran up the aisle, trying to get to a side door I'd seen near the front. But as I reached for the handle, I felt someone grab my arm. I looked back, and one of the men in the suits had a tight grip on me, his face still expressionless. I pulled away as hard as I could and managed to break free, stumbling back into the aisle. The other people were starting to stand up now, moving slowly like they weren't in any hurry. They weren't saying anything, just closing in on me from all sides. I bolted toward the other side of the room, where there was another door. I didn't know where it led, but it was my only shot. I reached it and shoved it open, running into a narrow hallway lined with old wooden doors. It looked like some kind of storage area or offices. I didn't care. I just kept running, trying to find an exit. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer. I didn't stop to see who it was, just ran faster, shoving open doors as I went, hoping one would lead outside. Most of them were just closets or small rooms, but finally, I found one that led to a back stairwell. I took the steps 2 at a time, almost tripping over myself, and when I got to the bottom, I saw a door leading outside. I pushed it open and stumbled out into the daylight, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling for my keys with shaking hands. I got in and locked the doors, looking back at the church. The pastor was standing in the doorway, just watching me. He didn't come after me, didn't say anything, just stood there with that same blank expression. There were a few other people behind him, standing just inside the door, but none of them came outside. I didn't wait to see what they'd do next. I started the car and sped out of there, my heart still pounding in my chest. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten out, but the way they looked at me, it was like they were all waiting for something, like I was supposed to be part of it, whatever it was. I still don't understand what was going on in there, and I'm not sure I ever want to know. All I know is that wasn't a church service. At least, not the kind I've ever been to. And whatever they were planning, I'm just glad I didn't stick around to find out. I had always wanted to escape the city for a while, just to breathe and find some quiet. So, when I discovered a quaint cottage for rent in the countryside, I booked it without hesitation. The pictures looked idyllic, with rolling hills and a small stream nearby. I imagined peaceful mornings with coffee and afternoons spent wandering. I was excited to finally take a break. When I arrived, the cottage was even more charming than I had expected. It had wooden beams and a fireplace that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. The owner met me to hand over the keys. He was a friendly older man, his face lined with years of sun and smiles. He told me to make myself at home, that I could explore the grounds, and even showed me a little garden behind the cottage. Everything felt perfect. The first night was serene. I cooked dinner and sat by the fire, listening to the sounds of nature outside. I fell asleep easily, wrapped in the warmth of the blanket and the quiet around me. The next day was much the same, filled with light and the fragrance of wildflowers. I went for a long walk, enjoying the stillness, taking pictures of everything that caught my eye. As the sun dipped low in the sky, I settled down again, feeling completely at peace. That night, however, things began to change. I woke up to an odd sound, a scratching noise coming from somewhere above. It was faint, but it pulled me from my sleep. I listened closely, trying to determine what it was. It sounded like something was moving, shifting, or perhaps even scraping against wood. My heart began to race. I told myself it was just the old house settling. But the sounds continued. They came and went, like whispers in the night. I tried to ignore it, turning over and burying my head in the pillow. Yet, the scratching persisted, and I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. I looked at the clock. It was almost 3 in the morning. I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, I hesitated before getting out of bed. The scratching had stopped, but I still felt uneasy. I decided I needed to ask the owner about it. Maybe there was some explanation. I drove to the small shop in the village where he worked. He was behind the counter, sorting through items. "Hello again," he said, smiling as I approached. "How was your first night?" I smiled back but could not hide the concern in my voice. "I heard some strange noises coming from the attic last night. Is there a way to check?" He frowned. "Attic? There is no attic in that cottage. Just the main floor and a small basement." I stared at him, puzzled. "No attic? But I heard something up there." It sounded like something was moving. He shrugged, a slight laugh escaping his lips. "Old houses make noises. It is probably just the wind or some critter outside. Do not worry about it." I wanted to feel reassured, but I did not. I thanked him and left the shop, feeling the unease grow inside me. That evening, I returned to the cottage. I tried to relax, reminding myself of the beauty of the countryside and the reason I had come. I cooked a simple meal and settled in front of the fire, but I could not shake the feeling of being watched. As night fell, I heard the sounds again. The scratching, the scuffling. It felt closer this time. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, trying to summon courage. I moved from the living room toward the staircase, every creak of the floorboards echoing in the stillness. The sound seemed to come from above, more insistent now, almost angry. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring into the darkness. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer came, just the persistent scratching. I took a deep breath and ascended the steps slowly. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound amplifying my anxiety. When I reached the top, I found myself in a small hallway. There were 2 doors, one leading to a bedroom and the other to a bathroom. The scratching was louder now, coming from behind the door to the bedroom. I hesitated, my heart racing. I had to know. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was dark, the window covered with thick curtains. I flicked on the light and scanned the space. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. The bed was neatly made, a small dresser against the wall. The scratching stopped. I stepped inside, feeling foolish. I was ready to convince myself it was just my imagination when I noticed something on the floor. A small trapdoor, barely noticeable, was hidden beneath the edge of the bed. My pulse quickened again. Crouching down, I gripped the handle and pulled. It creaked open, revealing a dark space below. The air that escaped was cool and stale. I hesitated, wondering if I should look inside. The sounds had stopped, but a part of me urged caution. I could feel something deep inside telling me not to go further. Instead, I decided to leave it alone and went back to the living room. I tried to watch television, but my mind kept drifting back to that trapdoor. What was down there? My curiosity gnawed at me, but fear held me back. I finally decided to sleep with the lights on, hoping for a peaceful rest. That night was different. I slept fitfully, constantly waking up to listen for any sounds. As morning light broke through the curtains, I felt a sense of relief. The scratching had not returned, but I still felt on edge. I packed my bags and decided to leave early. Before driving away, I stopped at the shop again. The owner was still there, sorting through items. I took a breath, gathering my thoughts. I heard strange noises last night. It felt like something was in the cottage. He raised an eyebrow, surprised. You really must be imagining things. I promise, there is nothing to worry about. I nodded, forcing a smile. I felt like I was the only one who had experienced this. I drove away, glancing back at the cottage one last time. The unease still lingered, but I was relieved to be leaving. When I reached home, I could finally relax. I promised myself I would never book a cottage again without thoroughly checking it out. As days passed, I put the experience behind me. Yet, late one night, while settling into bed, I heard a faint scratching noise outside my window. I sat straight up, heart racing. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just a branch against the glass. I looked outside, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move. I turned on the light, breathing deeply. I had escaped the cottage, but something about that weekend stayed with me. I never forgot the trapdoor or the scratching. I realized that sometimes it is better not to know what lies beneath the surface. I took my dog, Max, to the local park every evening. It was a routine that I cherished. The park was usually quiet at that hour, and I appreciated the fresh air and a chance for Max to run around. On this particular evening, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. The air felt crisp, and I could hear the distant laughter of children playing. As we walked along the path, I noticed a group of teenagers sitting on a bench. They seemed to be having a good time, laughing and joking among themselves. I didn't pay them much attention at first. Max was busy sniffing at the ground, his nose buried in the grass. I moved a little closer to the edge of the path to give them space as I walked by. As I approached, I heard them whispering to each other. I could feel their eyes on me, but I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on Max. Just as I passed them, I heard one of them say my name. It was strange because I had never seen any of them before. I looked back over my shoulder, and they were all standing now, still whispering. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did you just say my name? I asked, my voice steady, though I felt a knot in my stomach. They all looked at each other, and one of them, a girl with short black hair, stepped forward. We just wanted to talk to you, she said, her tone light but her eyes intense. We know you. I frowned, feeling a mixture of confusion and unease. You know me? From where? They exchanged glances again, and my unease deepened. I turned to walk away, urging Max to keep moving, but then I heard it. Come on, don't be like that. We just want to have a little chat, another one called out. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. Max seemed to sense something was off too. He stayed close to my side, his ears perked up. But when I looked back, I saw they had started following me, their whispers growing louder. Why are you following me? I asked, my heart racing. Because we need to talk, Tom, the girl said again. My heart sank. How did she know my name? I had not introduced myself, nor had anyone in the park called out to me. I turned a corner, hoping to lose them, but they were persistent. They continued to follow at a distance, just close enough that I could hear snippets of their conversation. He thinks he can ignore us, one of them said. I could feel panic rising within me. I glanced around, looking for other people in the park. It was still relatively empty, and the sun was nearly gone. I decided to head toward the playground, thinking there might be some parents around. As I approached, the group picked up their pace. You don't need to run, Tom. We are just friends, the girl called out, her voice dripping with mockery. I felt a wave of anger mixed with fear. I don't know you, I shouted back, trying to sound more assertive than I felt. They laughed, and it sent chills down my spine. I reached the playground, hoping to find someone who could help, but it was empty. I glanced over my shoulder, and they had stopped a few feet away, standing just outside the light from the playground's lamps. I could see their silhouettes, but their expressions were hidden in the darkness. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Because we can, Tom." "You are in our territory now," the girl said, and the others laughed again. The words echoed in my mind. I felt trapped, like I was in a game I didn't understand. I looked at Max, who was still by my side, his fur bristling. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to confront them. I had to protect Max and myself. "Leave me alone," I said, trying to sound firm. One of the boys stepped forward, smirking. "We just want to talk, really. We know what you did." "What I did?" I felt my heart drop. "I don't even know you." They advanced a few steps, and I stepped back instinctively, my mind racing. I had to find a way out of this situation. I looked for another path, but the layout of the park was disorienting in the dark. I took a few steps back, thinking maybe I could make it to the parking lot where my car was. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, heart racing, and saw it was just a dad picking up his child from the playground. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Hey, you all right?" he asked, noticing the tension in my body. "Not really." I began, but then the group of teenagers shifted, moving closer. The dad noticed, his expression changing. "You need to leave him alone," he said firmly, stepping in front of me. The teenagers paused, exchanging uncertain glances. "We were just talking to him," the girl replied, but I could see the intimidation flickering in her eyes. "Whatever you think you are doing, it is not okay." "Back off," he said, and I felt a surge of gratitude. The group hesitated, and for a moment, I thought they might retreat. But then the boy who had spoken earlier laughed, trying to appear nonchalant. "We were just having some fun." The dad didn't back down. "Not here. Leave. Now." With one last glare at me, they turned and began to walk away, whispering among themselves. I could not shake the sense of relief and disbelief. They were really just leaving? Once they were far enough away, I took a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly leave my body. The dad turned to me, concern still etched on his face. "You okay? Do you want me to walk you to your car?" I nodded, grateful for the offer. "Yes, please." I'm not sure why they were following me. I have never seen them before. He kept a protective stance as we walked, and I felt safer with him nearby. "People can be strange," he said, shaking his head. "You did the right thing by not engaging with them." Max stayed close, and I felt a surge of affection for my dog. He had sensed the danger, and I realized how much I relied on him. We reached my car, and I quickly unlocked the door. The dad stood by, ensuring I got in safely. "If you see them again or feel unsafe, don't hesitate to call the police," he said. "Thank you," I replied, feeling the weight of the encounter finally lift. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the empty park behind me. I drove home, reflecting on how quickly things could escalate. The park, once a safe haven, had turned into a scene of intimidation. I vowed to stay alert and to trust my instincts. I had learned a hard lesson about being cautious, and I would not forget it anytime soon. Max curled up in the passenger seat, and as I drove into the night, I felt a renewed sense of vigilance. I would not let fear control my life. I lived in a shared apartment with 3 other people. We were all friends at first, but things changed once we settled in. Over time, I started to notice things missing from my room. At first, it was small stuff: my favorite mug, a pair of headphones, a book I had been reading. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I misplaced them. But then it became more noticeable. One evening, I searched my room thoroughly, moving things around and checking every nook and cranny. I was certain I had not lost them. I started to suspect one of my roommates. Emily seemed to have an odd way of borrowing things without asking, often forgetting to return them. The others, Mike and Josh, were more laid back. They respected boundaries, but Emily was different. I mentioned it casually to the others, but they just laughed it off, saying I was being paranoid. The feeling of unease gnawed at me. I decided I had to do something. I had an old security camera lying around from when I lived with my parents, so I set it up in my room, hoping to catch Emily in the act. I pointed it at my door, thinking if she came in, I would know for sure. The first night, I fell asleep feeling anxious, half expecting to wake up to the sound of my door creaking open. I had to remind myself that I might be overreacting. The next morning, I woke up early and rushed to check the footage. I felt both excitement and dread, but when I scrolled through the video, I was surprised to find nothing. No sign of anyone entering my room. I convinced myself it was a waste of time. I continued with my routine, but the feeling of things disappearing did not let up. A week later, I decided to give it another try. I set the camera up again, adjusting it to ensure I could capture more of the room. I went to bed that night feeling a mix of hope and anxiety. The next morning, I woke up, heart racing, and checked the footage again. I scrolled through the hours, my anticipation building, but I felt a chill as I saw something I did not expect. Around 3 a.m., my door creaked open. It was not Emily, though. A figure slipped in, barely making a sound. I could not see their face clearly. They moved quietly, almost like a shadow. I felt sick. Who was this? Why were they in my room? My heart pounded as I continued watching. The intruder moved to my desk, rifling through my things. They picked up my laptop, glancing around as if they were worried someone would catch them. I wanted to scream, but I was frozen, my hands shaking as I kept watching. After a minute, they dropped my laptop back onto the desk and turned toward my bed. I gasped as I realized I was still asleep, completely unaware. The intruder leaned over me, and I could barely see their face. I could only make out a hood pulled tightly over their head. I felt panic rising in my chest. What were they planning to do? Suddenly, they stepped back and hurried out of the room, the door closing softly behind them. I scrambled to the video controls, my heart racing. I replayed the moment again and again, trying to comprehend what I had just seen. This was not just someone borrowing my things. This was an invasion. After the shock wore off, I grabbed my phone and called Mike. I felt like I had to tell someone. I could not deal with this alone. He answered, groggy from sleep, but I rushed through my words. You need to come over. I think someone has been in my room. I could hear him sit up, concern creeping into his voice. What do you mean? Like, what happened? I explained everything, and his tone shifted from confusion to alarm. You need to call the police, he said firmly. I agreed. I needed help, but I felt a mix of dread and relief at the thought of getting someone involved. Mike arrived within minutes. I had not even realized how tense I had been until I saw him walk through the door. I hurried to show him the footage, my hands trembling as I clicked on the right file. Watch this, I said, and I could see the color drain from his face as the video played. Who the hell is that? He whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't know, I replied, my throat tight. But they have been coming in while I sleep. What should we do? Mike paced the room, his mind racing. First, we call the police. They need to know someone has been in here. I nodded, feeling a weight lift slightly. I called the police, explaining everything I had seen. They assured me they would send someone right away. In the meantime, Mike suggested I stay at his place until they arrived. I didn't argue. While we waited, I locked my bedroom door and made sure the camera was still running. I felt a mix of fear and determination. I would not let this person take control of my life. When the police arrived, they listened carefully to my story. I showed them the footage, and their expressions changed as they saw the intruder. "This is serious," one officer said. "We will need to take a copy of this. Can you tell us if you recognize the person?" "I have no idea who it is," I said, feeling defeated. "I've never seen them before." The officers discussed among themselves, and I felt the tension in the room. They took my information, assured me they would investigate, and advised me to stay vigilant. They told me to contact them if anything else happened or if I saw the person again. Once they left, I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. I spent the night at Mike's place, grateful for the company. I told him about all the little things I had noticed missing. It felt good to share that burden. The next few days were filled with anxiety. I stayed at Mike's, unable to sleep at home. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. The police kept me updated, but they had not found anything significant. After a week, I decided I needed to confront the situation. I could not let fear control my life. I went back to the apartment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The familiar space felt strange and unsettling. I walked into my room, checking that everything was in place. My laptop was still there, my books still lined up on the shelf. I noticed nothing had been disturbed since the police had left. Maybe the intruder had moved on. As I settled in, I decided to keep the camera running, hoping for peace of mind. That night, I locked the door, feeling a little safer. I fell asleep, exhausted from the stress. A few nights later, I woke up suddenly, feeling a chill in the air. I opened my eyes and stared at the dark room, heart racing. I glanced at the clock. It was around 3 a.m. again. Just like before. I could hear something, a soft sound outside my door. My heart thudded loudly in my chest. I sat up and strained to listen. The noise grew louder. Someone was trying to open my door. Adrenaline coursed through me as I reached for my phone. I fumbled with it, pressing the home button to turn on the screen. The light illuminated my room, and I felt a sense of panic rising. The door handle turned slowly, and I knew I had to act fast. I hit the button to alert the police, my fingers trembling. I glanced toward the door as it creaked open slightly. I turned my camera on, catching the moment just as a figure slipped into my room. It was the same intruder. They were back. This time, I was ready. I didn't scream, but I felt fury rising within me. I wanted to confront this person. As they stepped closer, I shouted, "Who are you?" "Get out." The intruder froze, eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the tension thick in the air. Then, without a word, they turned and ran. I was right behind them, bolting out of my room and down the hall. I sprinted after them, adrenaline pushing me forward. I saw them rush toward the exit, and I shouted for help. I could hear my roommates waking up, confused shouts echoing in the background. As the intruder reached the front door, I saw Mike step out of his room. "What is going on?" he yelled, and the figure turned to run in the opposite direction. I reached for my phone to call the police again, but Mike grabbed my arm. "Let's go after them," he said, and I nodded, heart racing. We dashed outside, looking for any sign of the intruder. We searched the parking lot but found nothing. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as we checked around the building. After what felt like an eternity, we saw a figure slipping around the corner, darting away into the shadows. "Hey!" I shouted, but they vanished into the darkness. The moment felt surreal, as if we had just witnessed a ghost slipping away. We called the police again, but this time I felt different. I had stood up to them. I had not let fear control me. The police arrived soon after, taking statements and investigating the area. Later that night, we sat down together, still shaken but relieved. I had faced the intruder, and I felt stronger. They may have gotten away, but I was not going to let this define me. I would be vigilant, and I would take back my space. I would not let fear linger in my life any longer. It was late when I finally made it to the beach. I'd been driving all day, trying to get some distance from everything, from work, from people. Just needed some quiet. I found this spot down a winding road, tucked between cliffs, barely marked on the map. It was a wide, empty stretch of sand, nothing around but a few dark rocks scattered here and there, the waves crashing against them. I parked at the far end of the beach where there was no one else in sight, not a single other car. The sun was just starting to set, and the air was cool, just right. I took off my shoes, left them by the car, and walked toward the water. The sand was cold under my feet, but I didn't mind. It felt good, felt calm. I walked slowly, listening to the waves, watching the colors fade as the sky turned from orange to gray, then darker. I walked a while, thinking I'd go to the far end of the beach and then turn back, just to stretch my legs. After a bit, I looked back, just to see how far I'd gone. My footprints stretched out behind me in a straight line, and I was surprised by how far I'd already walked. There was no one else around, just me and my tracks in the sand, going back to where I'd parked. It felt good, having all that space to myself. As I kept going, I started to notice something strange. My footprints in the sand looked different. I don't know how to describe it at first. They were there, same size and shape, just like they should be. But it looked like they'd somehow gotten closer together. Like there were more of them, almost doubled up, like someone had been walking right behind me, stepping exactly in my tracks. I turned around, half expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. I didn't see anything unusual, just a darkening beach, the waves rolling in, my car a tiny dot in the distance. I shook my head, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the wind had blown some of the sand over, making it look like there were more footprints. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept looking over my shoulder as I walked, expecting to see someone, but the beach was empty. Just me, the sand, and the waves. I told myself to keep going. The end of the beach wasn't far now. I'd walk to the end, turn around, and head back. I kept moving, ignoring the unease in my gut. Then, I stopped. I don't know what made me stop. Just a feeling. I looked down at my footprints again, and this time I noticed it for sure. There were two sets of prints, one mine, and another, right next to it. They were lined up so perfectly, step for step, that they matched my prints exactly. Same size, same shape, like a shadow, following my every move. My heart started pounding. I bent down, squatting next to one of the pairs, studying them closer. It was impossible. They were the exact same size as my feet, same width, same length, same everything. I looked up and down the beach, but there wasn't a soul in sight. Just empty sand stretching back to where I'd parked. I looked again, checking to see if maybe the prints went off somewhere else, like someone had crossed paths with me at some point and I'd missed it. But there was nothing. The tracks started right behind me, as if someone had just appeared and followed me exactly, step for step. I took a deep breath, tried to shake it off, and started walking back the way I'd come, heading toward my car. I kept my eyes forward, telling myself it was just some strange trick of the sand, maybe something to do with the way the light was fading. I kept moving, determined not to look back. But after a few steps, I couldn't help myself. I looked down, and my stomach twisted. The footprints were still there, right behind me, matching every single step. It was like someone was walking a few inches behind me, close enough that if I stopped, they would bump into me. I felt a chill run down my spine, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I kept going, faster now, my heart pounding. I didn't want to look back, but I could feel it, feel the presence of those steps behind me, matching every move I made. I picked up my pace, almost jogging now, my breath coming quicker, the sound of the waves drowned out by the rush of blood in my ears. When I finally looked down again, my heart stopped. There, right beside my own tracks, were those same exact prints, step for step, as if they'd been etched into the sand at the same moment mine were. I glanced behind me, expecting to see someone finally, a person who could explain this, anything that made sense. But there was nothing. Just that same empty beach, fading into darkness. I broke into a run, not caring about how it looked or who might be watching from a distance. I ran as fast as I could, toward the spot where I'd parked my car, not looking down, not wanting to see if the tracks were still there, if they were still matching my every step. My feet pounded against the sand, and I could hear the sound of my own breaths, coming hard and fast. When I reached my car, I threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked the doors, my hands shaking, and looked back at the beach through the window. The sun had almost completely set, casting everything in shadows, and for a second, I thought I saw a figure standing there, right where my last set of footprints stopped. But when I blinked, it was gone. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and started the engine. I didn't look back as I drove away, didn't want to see the beach, the sand, or the tracks that might still be there, waiting. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. It's been a few days since then, and I can't stop thinking about it. I keep checking my rearview mirror when I drive, glancing over my shoulder, feeling like there's someone just behind me, close enough to touch. I've tried to explain it to myself 100 different ways, tried to tell myself it was just shadows or some strange illusion. But every time I close my eyes, I see those footprints in the sand, perfect copies of my own, following right behind, step for step. I decided to take a solo hiking trip to the Grand Canyon. I'd always wanted to do it on my own, just me and the trail, nothing to bother me. I thought the quiet would be good for clearing my head, just walking at my own pace, feeling like I was the only person for miles. The day I chose was perfect, clear skies, a slight breeze, and only a few people around at the start. The narrow paths didn't bother me much, I was used to them. They cut along the cliffs, sharp turns, steep edges, and sometimes you could barely fit one person. If someone came from the other direction, you'd have to step back and let them by. A couple of hours in, I was deep enough that I stopped seeing anyone. Just me, the dry dirt under my boots, and the endless stretch of cliffs and the canyon below. I was moving along a narrow path, barely wide enough for one person, with a cliff drop on one side and a steep rock wall on the other. That's when I first noticed him. I was at a turn in the path when I saw him a ways behind me, another hiker, just standing still. It's common enough to see others on these trails, but this guy gave me a strange feeling right off. He was standing too still, and even from a distance, I could see him staring. The path was too narrow for him to have passed without me noticing, so he must have come from the same direction as me, but I didn't remember hearing or seeing him. I brushed it off, figuring he'd keep his distance or maybe stop for a break, and kept walking. But then, maybe 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. They were steady, a bit too close. I picked up my pace, hoping he'd get the hint, but the steps just matched mine. When I slowed, he slowed too. I could feel his eyes on my back. I finally turned around, and there he was, only a few feet away, staring. He was a man in his 30s, plain looking, with dark hair and a worn-out hiking jacket, but it was his eyes that got me. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at me, too intense, like he was sizing me up. I expected him to say something, maybe ask for directions or make small talk, but he just stared. It felt like he was waiting for me to do something. I mumbled a quick hey, nodding slightly, hoping it would break the weirdness, but he didn't respond. Just looked at me, eyes locked on like he didn't even hear me. I turned and kept walking, faster this time, telling myself he'd back off or maybe take a break. The footsteps kept following, steady and close, like he wasn't trying to keep his distance anymore. Every few minutes, I'd glance back, and he'd be there, always the same distance behind, eyes fixed on me, unblinking. The path was so narrow I couldn't just step aside, and there was no room for him to pass without brushing against me. But he never tried to pass, never made a move to overtake me, just followed, his footsteps syncing with mine. After about 20 minutes of this, I was starting to panic. There was no one else around, and I had no signal. The canyon was so quiet that every sound seemed louder, and his footsteps were the only thing I could hear besides my own. I thought about just stopping and confronting him, but something about the way he stared made me nervous. I didn't want to turn my back on him for too long. At one point, I slowed down so much that he had to stop too, and I turned around again. This time, he was close, maybe 3 feet away, staring straight at me with those same cold eyes. I could feel my heart pounding. I tried to keep my voice steady and said, "Are you trying to pass?" He didn't answer. Just kept looking at me like he was studying every move I made. It felt like he was waiting for something specific, and it made my skin crawl. After a moment, he took a single step forward, close enough now that I could see the dirt caked under his fingernails, the frayed edges of his jacket. That was it for me. I turned and started walking as fast as I could without running, hoping to put some distance between us. The path twisted and turned, and I hoped one of the bends would give me enough cover to lose him, but he kept up, his footsteps right behind me, always at the same distance, never closer, but never farther away. I could feel my breath getting shaky. The narrowness of the path felt suffocating. The cliff edge was only a few steps to my left, and the sheer drop was a constant reminder that I couldn't afford any wrong moves. At one point, I thought I could hear him breathing, slow and steady, matching my own. When the trail finally opened up a bit, I stopped again, thinking he'd have to pass me now. But instead, he stopped too, just far enough back to stay in the shadows, barely visible. He didn't say a word. Didn't even look like he was breathing heavy, just staring. I was on edge, my hands shaking. I didn't want to keep going with him behind me, so I tried something desperate. I pretended to take a break, setting down my backpack, and waited to see what he'd do. He just stood there, watching. When I didn't move, he didn't either. It felt like he was testing my patience, seeing how long I'd sit there before getting back up. After what felt like forever, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag and started moving again, faster than before, almost at a jog. I didn't care about the path or the view anymore. I just wanted to get to a spot with people around or any place that didn't feel so isolated. Finally, I saw a wider area up ahead, where the path opened up near a small ledge overlooking the canyon. I figured it was my best chance, somewhere I could keep my distance from him, maybe get a good enough view to see if anyone else was nearby. I sped up, practically sprinting, and reached the ledge, dropping my bag again to catch my breath. For a moment, it was quiet. I couldn't hear his footsteps. I dared to hope he finally stopped, maybe given up or gone another way. Then I looked back. He was still there, just at the edge of the narrow path, watching me, his face still blank, like he had no expression, no reaction to anything. He stepped forward, stopping just before the ledge, looking down at the canyon, then back at me. I don't know what possessed me, but I finally yelled, "What do you want?" He didn't say a thing. Just stared, eyes never moving off me. The silence stretched on, his gaze drilling into me, making my skin crawl. I felt trapped, nowhere to go but back down the same narrow path with him behind me. At last, after what felt like forever, he turned. He walked back down the trail, disappearing around the first bend, just like that. I didn't move for a while, just stood there, waiting, expecting him to come back around the corner any second, but he never did. Eventually, I made my way back down, my eyes darting around every turn, my heart pounding until I finally reached the busier trailheads. I've never gone back to the Grand Canyon since. The worst part is, I'll never know what he wanted, but I can still feel his eyes on me, watching, just out of reach. I had always prided myself on being independent. I lived alone in a small apartment, and I loved the quiet. My days were filled with work and routine. I would wake up, go to the gym, head to my office, and come home to read or watch television. There was comfort in my predictability. That is, until the calls started. At first, it was just a few late-night rings. I would wake up, groggy, and glance at my phone. No number showed on the screen, just unknown caller. I would ignore it and roll back over, thinking nothing of it. Everyone gets strange calls from time to time. However, the calls persisted, becoming a nightly occurrence. One night, I picked up the phone after the third ring. "Hello?" I asked, half asleep. There was silence on the other end. "Hello?" I repeated, my voice firmer this time. Still, nothing. I hung up, feeling a chill creeping down my spine. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, even from the other side of the line. The following night, the calls returned. I decided to ignore them again, but the silence felt heavy. It was not just the absence of words, it was an unsettling awareness. Somehow, I knew the caller was there, listening. After a week of these disturbing interruptions, I felt compelled to take action. I called my phone company during the day, hoping to get to the bottom of this. The customer service representative sounded bored but took my information and promised to investigate. After a few minutes on hold, they came back with news that I had not expected. "Ma'am, the calls are coming from a number registered to your own address," the representative said. I felt my heart drop. "What do you mean?" I asked, disbelief flooding my voice. "Your phone number is linked to a device registered at your residence," they continued. "You may want to check if someone else is using your line." I hung up, my mind racing. The thought of someone having access to my phone line made my stomach churn. I hurried home after work, checking every room in my apartment. I felt foolish searching for a hidden intruder, but the thought of someone being inside my home, watching me, made me sick. I even checked behind my curtains and in my closet, knowing full well that I lived alone. Days went by, and the calls continued. Each night, I would dread going to bed, listening for the phone to ring. I tried to convince myself it was all a coincidence, a glitch in the system. But deep down, I felt a sense of dread creeping closer, like a shadow stalking me. One night, I decided to do something different. I went to bed, set my phone to silent, and placed it face down on the nightstand. I would not let it control me any longer. I was exhausted, and sleep overtook me quickly. But then the ringing started. It was louder than usual, jolting me awake. My heart raced as I blinked in the darkness, reaching for my phone. I grabbed it and saw that it was now displaying the same unknown caller information. My skin crawled. I picked it up, ready to yell into the void, but before I could even speak, the ringing stopped. I stared at the screen, half expecting to see a message or something, but there was nothing. My breath was heavy as I tried to calm myself. I decided to get up and pour a glass of water. I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone. As I walked to the kitchen, the shadows in my apartment felt thicker. The darkness seemed to have a life of its own. I reached the kitchen, turned on the light, and poured my drink. As I took a sip, I heard a soft thud coming from the living room. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. The sound had come from inside my apartment. I put the glass down and crept back into the living room, careful not to make a sound. I glanced around, scanning every corner, but I saw nothing. Everything was as it should be, yet my skin tingled with an awful awareness that something was off. Just then, my phone buzzed. I jumped, startled, and hurried back to my room. I picked it up and saw a text notification. It was from an unknown number. I opened it, and my heart sank. The message read, "I see you're still home alone." Panic surged through me. I stared at the screen, my breath coming in short gasps. How did they know? I turned to look at the window, my mind racing through every possibility. I felt vulnerable, exposed. I needed to act fast. I decided to call the police, my fingers trembling as I dialed the number. I explained everything, from the phone calls to the message I had just received. The operator assured me that they would send someone over, but it felt like an eternity before the knock on my door finally came. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood there, looking serious. I let them in and explained everything again, my voice shaky. They listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. As they looked around my apartment, I felt a small bit of relief. I was not alone anymore. They reviewed the situation and decided to check the area outside, just in case. I waited anxiously, pacing my living room as I replayed the events in my mind. Minutes felt like hours until one of the officers returned. "Ma'am, we didn't find anyone, but we will keep an eye on the area," he said. "You should consider changing your number and maybe even installing some security measures." I nodded, feeling overwhelmed by it all. The officers left, and I locked the door behind them. I thought about what they said. Changing my number felt like giving in, but I knew I had to do something. I could not live like this any longer. After a few days of restless sleep and constant vigilance, I finally called my phone company to change my number. They assured me it would be effective immediately. That evening, I received my final unknown call. It rang twice before I could answer, and I took a deep breath. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady. This time, there was silence on the other end. It was deafening, and my heart raced in anticipation. I waited, hoping they would respond. Nothing. The line went dead, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I hung up and turned off my phone for the night. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers tightly around me. The darkness felt a little less suffocating now. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, hoping that this time I would sleep soundly. A few days later, I noticed a change in my life. I had a new phone number, and the calls had stopped. My mind felt clearer, and I slowly started to return to my routine. I felt like I could finally breathe again. I no longer felt like someone was watching me. One evening, as I returned home from work, I noticed something odd. There was a package on my doorstep. It was small and wrapped neatly, but it had no return address. I picked it up, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. Had someone sent me something? I opened the package cautiously, revealing a small, ornate box. I held it in my hands, unsure of what to do. My heart raced, and I felt the familiar tingle of fear creeping back in. I opened the box, and inside was a phone, my old phone. The one that had been plagued with those calls. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what this meant. My blood ran cold as I realized that I had not changed my number on that device. I was still being watched. I was driving home late that night, later than I'd planned. It was one of those empty, rural roads where you don't see another car for miles. No lights, no signs, just miles of road cutting through fields and woods. I was trying to keep myself awake, rolling down the window to let the cold air in, but it was quiet out there, too quiet. I saw him before I even realized what I was seeing. Just a figure on the side of the road, standing in the shadows, close enough that the edge of my headlights caught him. He was wearing a jacket, maybe a backpack, but what stood out was how still he was. No thumb out, no walking, just standing there, looking at the road. Looking at my car. I didn't stop. I'm not the type to pick up hitchhikers, especially not at that hour, especially not in the middle of nowhere. But as I passed him, something felt off. It was just the way he was standing there, so still, like he was waiting for something. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, but I kept going, trying not to think too much about it. I told myself it was probably nothing. People hitchhike, it's not weird. Except it felt weird. I drove another mile or so, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror, but all I could see was darkness stretching out behind me. I tried to shake the feeling off. Maybe I was just tired, maybe I was overthinking it. A few minutes later, the road started to curve, and that's when I saw him again. Same guy, standing right in the middle of the road this time, facing me, directly in my path. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a stop just a few feet from him. My heart was racing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was no way he could have gotten here before me, not on foot. It was impossible. But there he was, standing there like he'd been waiting for me. His face was in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me, feel him watching me through the windshield. For a moment, neither of us moved. I just sat there, my foot frozen on the brake, staring at him, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I thought about turning around, but the road was too narrow, and I didn't want to risk backing into the ditch. I honked the horn, just a short blast to get him to move, but he didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. He just kept standing there, staring at me. Something about the way he was standing, it wasn't right. His arms hung at his sides, limp, like he wasn't even using them to balance himself. He looked unnatural, like someone who had forgotten how to move, how to act like a person. I honked again, longer this time, and still nothing. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were slick with sweat, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there. I glanced at the passenger seat, looking for something to protect myself with, anything, but all I had was a water bottle and some loose change. I rolled the window down just enough to speak, but my voice came out shaky. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, trying to keep it together. He didn't answer. Didn't move. just stood there, like he was waiting for me to do something. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, to leave, but I couldn't. I was trapped. I shifted the car into reverse, my hands trembling, trying to back up slowly, but he took a step forward. Just one step, but it was enough to send a jolt of panic through me. I stopped the car, my foot hovering over the gas pedal, my mind racing. What did he want? Why wasn't he saying anything? I couldn't think straight. My brain was foggy, like I was in a bad dream and couldn't wake up. I kept glancing at him, hoping he'd turn around and walk away, but he didn't. He just stood there, his face still hidden in the shadows, like he was waiting for me to make the first move. I took a deep breath and gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. There was no way I was getting out of the car. I wasn't about to confront him, not when something felt so wrong. Finally, I decided to risk it. I slammed the car into gear and hit the gas, swerving around him as fast as I could. For a split second, I thought I might hit him, but he stepped aside at the last moment, just enough for me to pass by. I caught a glimpse of his face then, just for a second, and it sent a chill down my spine. His eyes were wide, staring right through me, and his mouth was twisted into this strange, unnatural grin. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept driving, my hands shaking on the wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. The road stretched on ahead of me, but it felt like it was getting longer, like I was driving in circles and couldn't get out. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing there, but there was nothing. Just darkness. I don't know how long I drove like that, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers hurt, but eventually the road started to feel familiar again. I passed a sign for the next town, and I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I couldn't get his face out of my head, the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd just appeared in the middle of the road like he'd been waiting for me. It didn't make any sense. By the time I pulled into town, my body was exhausted, but my mind was racing. I parked the car outside a gas station and just sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. I could still see his face, clear as day, burned into my memory. I don't know who he was, or how he got there, or what he wanted. All I know is that I wasn't supposed to stop. I wasn't supposed to talk to him. Something about him wasn't human, or maybe it was, but in a way that scared me more. I never went back to that road. I couldn't. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl, like he's still out there, waiting for me to drive by again. I wonder what would have happened if I'd stopped, if I'd gotten out of the car. Part of me doesn't want to know. I had always been drawn to the outdoors. Hiking, camping, and being surrounded by nature was my escape from the busy life back home. When I finally got the chance to visit Great Basin National Park, I felt like I was stepping into paradise. The vastness of the night sky and the rugged mountains were mesmerizing. I planned a night hike, wanting to experience the park under the stars. The sun set slowly, and I started my hike just as twilight settled in. I had a flashlight strapped to my waist, and the beam of light flickered against the trees, illuminating my path. As I walked, the sounds of the night surrounded me, the rustling of leaves, the distant chirping of crickets, and the occasional call of an owl. It felt peaceful, almost magical, but something in the air felt heavy, as if the night was holding its breath. After hiking for about an hour, I reached a clearing with a view of the stars. I stopped to take it all in, the vastness of the universe stretching above me. I pulled out my phone to take a picture when I noticed a movement on one of the nearby rock outcroppings. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but there it was again, a figure, waving at me. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see more clearly. The figure was standing on the rock, silhouetted against the night sky. They raised their arm again, a slow and deliberate wave, as if they were beckoning me over. My heart raced with excitement and curiosity. I had heard that it was common for hikers to encounter other people out in the wilderness, especially on popular trails like this one. I assumed this person might have a similar interest in the stars or was simply enjoying the solitude of the night. "Hello!" I called out, raising my hand in response. "Is everything okay?" The figure continued to wave, but I noticed something odd. They were not moving from that spot. No steps were taken toward me. The way they waved felt almost mechanical, like they were waiting for me to approach. A chill ran down my spine. Despite the unease creeping in, I felt compelled to investigate. I started walking towards the outcropping, careful with each step. The ground was rocky and uneven, and I felt a mix of excitement and dread. As I got closer, I called out again, "Hey! Are you all right?" The figure was now barely visible. The moment I stepped onto the outcropping, I realized there was no one there. I stood frozen, scanning the area for any sign of movement. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the thrill of the unknown turning into something darker. The air felt thicker, and I felt like I was being watched. Then I noticed the ground beneath me. The dirt was freshly disturbed, as if someone had been standing right there just moments before. There were footprints leading away from the rock, but they were erratic and scattered, like whoever had been there had moved quickly and in a panic. My breath quickened as I crouched down to examine the area more closely. The footprints were not from a hiker's boots. They were bare and left a clear imprint in the soil, leading deeper into the darkness. I glanced back at the path I had come from. It felt like a lifetime away, and the way back suddenly seemed daunting. I had always felt comfortable in nature, but now it felt like a trap. A cold wind swept through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. I stood up, a deep sense of fear washing over me. I had to leave. I turned around, planning to retrace my steps, but I hesitated. I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone. I quickly made my way back to the trail, glancing over my shoulder. The darkness felt alive, as if it were watching me. I moved faster, adrenaline pushing me forward, and I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was just someone playing a prank, or perhaps a hiker who had lost their way. But something deep inside me knew that this was different. The shadows around me felt longer, darker. I picked up my pace, my breathing coming in sharp bursts as I hurried down the trail. Every rustle of the leaves and snap of a twig made me jump. The more I hurried, the more the fear grew. I wanted to believe I was just overreacting, but it felt too real. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I glanced around, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the area was quiet. I threw my gear in the back seat and locked the doors as soon as I was inside. I sat there for a moment, heart racing, trying to calm myself. I looked back at the trail, the darkness swallowing it up, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. As I drove away, I could not shake the feeling that I had escaped something sinister. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I knew what I had seen. The figure waving, the disturbed earth, and the footprints leading into the night haunted me as I left the park. I would never forget the feeling of being watched, the quiet tension of the night, and the strange, unsettling encounter that pushed me to the edge. Great Basin National Park was meant to be a refuge, a place of beauty, but it turned into a nightmare I would carry with me long after I left. I promised myself I would never hike alone at night again, knowing that the wilderness can hold more than just nature. It can hold secrets that are best left undisturbed.